Secretary, and I apologize for the awkward placement. The Mayor's Council can see me, but I just realized now, because of the unfortunate placement of that pillar, members of the public cannot. We'll entertain a motion later to move that pillar. I'm the Executive Director of the Mayor's Council Secretariat. I'm directly accountable to this body as an advisor and to support the Council in delivering its mandate and direction. So in that role, I'll act as MC for this first item. We're here to swear in the newly elected members of the Mayor's Council. Before we begin the swearing-in ceremony, we'd like to acknowledge and respect that we're meeting here today in the territory of the Kikite First Nation, as well as all Coast Salish people on whose territories TransLink works, operates, and serves. So in recognition of this and to welcome the new Mayor's Council to its responsibilities towards our region, Carl Selim, a councillor from the Squamish First Nation, is here to provide a welcome. Do you want to come over here?
I know it's weird to have my back to these people right here, so I'm really apologize for that. I'd like to begin by sharing a few words in my language, the Squamish language, and just to follow up on the introduction. My name is Carl Selim. I'm an elected council member and spokesperson for the Squamish Nation. I live in the city of Vancouver, but also work in North Vancouver in the municipality of Squamish. But I want to welcome you in our language, one of the many Coast Salish languages whose territory that we come from in the Lower Mainland and Metro Vancouver region. So I'd say Tanoyap anakoito, Tanoyap siam et seocha, Tanoyap ansi Chinkon mantomeyap quis na ois ti lam tit sits, Nelta ans Salem, Chinkon mantomeyap quis Quist sets up need to quit out stalmoch. On hearts and squall when quins quatch no me up, 80 squall tit seats. Chin sets up not to schopmish os ochomelch. Chin sets up not to ochomelch chit, not to temelch chit, not to squen chit. Hearts quis slawat to stalmoch. Hearts quis chinchins to ochomelch. Eoch swat wa 8T na wa in chopmo wa sets up no was. Amen. Chin hachnuch to snowile tenat to seoch watchit. Chit wa chinchins to stalmo quis chit sets up timati. With na ontlate to sets up. Chin konman ome to chase siam amen chin konman to quite see kite all ochomeo nestis to meo. You know, hearts and squall wins quins one nachum to snachum chit. Amen. Chin konman tome up to mat quite see clear and snachum. I shared a few words in my language, and first of all, I want to thank the Metro Mayor's Council for inviting me to be here. As an elected representative of the Squamish Nation, I'm sometimes called upon to officially welcome you on behalf of our council and our nation, and I know a number of you operate within our shared territories of the Squamish people, the Musqueam people, and the Tsleil-Waututh people, but also here in the territory of the Kikite, which was shared actually with a number of other communities. There was a time when the Squamish also had a village here in Kikite, where we call Squamish, and it moved around. At one point it was on this side of the river, and then it moved over to the other. But our relationship to our neighbors was at one point quite strong, and it was linked through our shared values and culture that we demonstrated and practiced throughout the year. Whether it was through our resource gathering practices, or whether it was through our intermarriage, or whether it was through our winter ceremonies and our cultural practices, but we shared a lot of common interests. And there are times in our history that we know that our people across linguistic boundaries and regional boundaries would come together to solve issues that required all of our nations to come together. And this was often to defend our people. And so I stand here very humbly as to welcome you all to this territory, but also to impart on some of the messages that we were told when we were elected. In my language, I shared a little bit about how this work that we're doing as elected officials is quite sacred and very important, and yet very difficult. That the concept of unity within our culture and our language, which we call, in Squamish, it's called Nchotmo, and Hunkamitnam, the other language from this territory, is called Natsamat. And the meaning of that word, actually, when you break it down, it refers to being one piece of a larger structure. That you are one piece of something. So when we say we are Natsamat or we are Nchotmo, we are one piece of something larger that we're contributing to. And so we think about this concept when we do the work as leadership for our people. And something that I've imparted more recently with the successful transition of all the wonderful new mayors who have stepped forward into this role, both within the Squamish territory. It's really actually exciting for me to say that, and I know a number of you are from our territory, but every mayor in Squamish Nation territory is new. We have around 10 to 12 municipalities in regional district, and every mayor is new in our territory. And something that we as a nation have been very proud of and excited about is the way that this work of reconciliation, although may come from the federal government to the provincial government, that we are finally seeing movement happening at the municipal level, which I would call the final frontier of this work of reconciliation. To both acknowledge the past and the way that it impacts where we are today, but the ability for us as leaders to change the context for the people to come and really impart a legacy that is meaningful for Indigenous people, but also for all Canadians. And so I'm really excited about the opportunity to work with a number of you on shared projects that the Squamish Nation is interested in working with all the different municipalities on, but also I think many First Nations, that the Squamish and the Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh, as one example, have been able to achieve a significant amount of success from our ability to work together on shared goals and objectives. And we aspire to the same sort of working relationship with all municipalities, all levels of government. And so I just really want to thank all of you, as somebody who voted in a municipal election, as somebody who cares about the issues that you all care about that will happen at this table and happen at your own council chambers. I do want to thank each of you for stepping forward. One of the things I said actually at the inauguration in Vancouver was, and I think this is something I tell a lot of people, the vast majority of our citizens chose not to run for the positions you're in. The vast majority of people didn't want the job that you have. And that to me, just like when I ran for council, that to me tells me that this is a job that most people don't want to do, but somebody has to do. And our responsibility in that role is to do the best we can for the people that have asked us to do this job. So I just really want to thank each of you for stepping forward into this role, for running and for putting your lives into this public service. And that as a citizen of this country, I am very grateful for each and every one of you. And as an elected leader, I just want to congratulate you on behalf of the Squamish Nation and the people that are very grateful for the opportunity to continue to work together. So in my language, we say, Tamat kwetsi kuya snechum. Those are my words. Thank you. Osium.
Thank you, Castellan, for that. All right, so let's begin. And just a quick housekeeping. The washrooms are located over there to the right. For those who are in the audience and can't see me, that's behind you and to the right. Fire exit is just behind us here as well. So I'd like to begin the swearing-in ceremony. All newly elected members will be asked one by one to the table here to sign their oath of office to the Mayor's Council on Regional Transportation, which is an oath that's stipulated to us by TransLink's governing legislation, the South Coast British Columbia Transportation Authority Act. Gigi Kenquo, the corporate secretary, will administer. Do you want to just come through here and sign each oath? And just to emphasize, only members elected to the Mayor's Council for the first time are required to sign the oath. Once you've been on the Mayor's Council, you're oathed in for life, I suppose. Just to explain the oath, and it's for those in the audience, it's here. It's actually it's in the agenda packages as well. I think on page 2. The oath commits members to execute the office of member of the Mayor's Council to the best of their knowledge, skills, and ability, and to consider the interests of the transportation service region as a whole. And I do want to acknowledge that the requirement for members to wear two hats, a local hat at their own local government councils and a regional hat when they're here at the Mayor's Council, is not always clearly distinguishable or frankly easily practiced. And the tension and balance between these two responsibilities, local and regional, is actually a feature of our regional governance structure here in Metro Vancouver, and one which allows the region to be accountable to both local needs and region-wide accountabilities. And ultimately, this is an accountability under the law to the public, but first to one another as regional leaders. So this oath formalizes the commitment to be serving on the Mayor's Council as a regional leader. And before we begin going through each of your names, I just want to note that we actually have one new member of the Mayor's Council, Justin LeBlanc, who is the Director-elect of Electoral Area A. He won't be sworn in today because he's not sworn in as a regional director until tomorrow at the Metro Vancouver board meeting. Thus, he's not eligible to take office here until that happens, so we can swear him in at the next meeting. But he's here as an observer. And Maria Harris, the incumbent and outgoing director of Electoral Area A, is also attending. And she's at the table here. So with that, I'll now call each one of the new members of the Mayor's Council up to sign their oath of office. We'll start with Mayor Neil Blankeny of the village of Belcara. You can just come up here. Great, thank you. And Mayor Marianne Booth of the District of West Vancouver.
Do you swear that you will fulfill your duties as a member of the Mayor's Council of Regional Transportation in accordance with this oath of office?
And thank you. The Mayor Val Vendebroek of the City of Langley.
Do you swear that you will fulfill your duties as a member of the Mayor's Council of Regional Transportation in accordance with this oath of office?
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Linda Buchanan of the City of North Vancouver.
Do you swear that you will fulfill your duties as a member of the Mayor's Council of Regional Transportation in accordance with this oath of office?
Welcome, Mayor. Thank you. Bill Dingwall of the City of Pitt Meadows.
Do you swear that you will fulfill your duties as a member of the Mayor's Council of Regional
Thank you. Next up, we have Mayor George Harvey of the City of Delta.
Do you swear that you will fulfill your duties as a member of the Mayor's Council of Regional Transportation in accordance with this oath of office?
Thank you. Next, we have Mayor Mike Hurley of the City of Burnaby, one of the three mics on the Mayor's Council, plus me.
Do you solemnly affirm your
Thank you, Mayor. Next is Mayor Mike Little of the District of North Vancouver.
Do you swear to fulfill your duties as a member of the Mayor's Council and your first business office?
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Doug McCallum of the City of Surrey.
Do you swear to fulfill your duties as a member of the Mayor's Council and Regional Transportation and
Thank you. Next, we have Mayor Ron McLaughlin of the Village of Lions Bay.
swear to fulfill your duties as a member of the Mayor's Council and Regional Transportation according to the state office?
Thank you. Next, we have Mayor Mike Morden of the City of Maple Ridge.
Do you swear to fulfill your duties as a member of the Mayor's Council and Regional Transportation according to the state office?
Next, we have Mayor Kennedy Stewart of the City of Vancouver, one of two Mayor Stewarts on the Mayor's Council.
Do you solemnly affirm that
Here, come on, if you come closer. Thank you. Next, we have Mayor Rob Vagramov of the City of Port Moody. He is not here. Mayor Darrell Walker of the City of White Rock.
swear that you will fulfill your duties as a member of the Mayor's Council and Transportation?
And finally, we have Mayor Brad West of the City of Port Coquitlam.
Do you swear that you will fulfill your duties as a member of the Mayor's Council and Regional Transportation in accordance with the state office?
Thank you. So in addition to Mayor Vagramov, I actually will note that the mayor of my own hometown. Oh, excellent. Perfect timing. So Mayor Vagramov of the City of Port Moody to sign his oath of his office. There's a seat right there in the corner. And then Mayor, actually, if you can, you arrived at literally the perfect time. Thank you. Finally, I just wanted to note the mayor of my own hometown, Gary Ander of Bowen Island Municipality is unable to attend today's meeting, so he, along with Director-elect LeBlanc, will be sworn at the next meeting. Before we proceed with the agenda, I do want to note and introduce the 6 returning members of the Mayor's Council: Chief Bryce Williams, the Tsawwassen First Nation; Mayor Jonathan Cote of the City of New Westminster; Mayor John McEwen of the Village of Belcarra. Oh my gosh, you're right. Oh, a throwdown. Mayor Malcolm Brody of the City of Richmond, Mayor Richard Stewart of the City of Coquitlam, and Mayor Jack Froese of the Township of Langley. So welcome and congratulations to you all, and I know that the TransLink team here, as well as myself, look forward to working with you and for the region. So with that, I'd like to conclude this part of the meeting, and I'm going to just head up to the front of the table so that we can actually see everyone. So the first item on the agenda is the election of interim chair and vice chair. And before we can, because in fact we have to do this, but because these positions are currently vacant, and as per Section 9.2 of our Rules of Procedure, which you can find on at the very end of your agenda package, in the absence of a chair and vice chair, obviously the council members and delegates present have to elect a council member to act as chair for the meeting. I would recommend, for the purposes of chairing this item, the election of chair, I recommend that you ask me, advised by our recording secretary here, Ray, and the corporate secretary, to act as chair. So I'd look for a motion for that. Second? All in favor? Thank you. So before I begin the election process, I will note that our rules specify that the election of chair and vice chair actually occurs the last meeting of the calendar year, which would be in December. So accordingly, that's why in today's agenda, this item is shown as the election of interim chair. However, our legislation, our rules are not restrictive on when the election of chair or vice chair for the coming term, the 2019 term, takes place. It's the will of the body to determine that timing. And given that the election of chair and vice chair for the 2019 term, that is next for calendar year 2019, is only scheduled for 1 month from now, I'd recommend that just one election be held today concurrently for both the interim chair, that is for the remainder of the 2018 term, and then for chair of 2019. If that's the will of the body, I would suggest a motion be made to that effect. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Great, thank you. So, given that, we'll proceed with the election accordingly. So this would be for the election of chair, interim chair, and 2019 chair. So I will flip to this process. So the floor is now open for nomination for the office of chair. I'll accept any nominations put forward. Mayor Brody. Press the right-hand button.
Mr. Chair, I would nominate the Mayor of the City of New Westminster, Jonathan Cote, for the position.
Mayor Cote, do you consent to the nomination?
I consent.
And you consent to the nomination. All right. And do you consent to the nomination?
I do.
Yes. Okay. Are there any further nominations for position of chair? Are there any further nominations for the position of chair? Here are no further nominations. May I have a motion to close the nominations for the office of chair? And I declare, and all in favor of closing the nominations? Thank you. I declare Mayor Cote to be claimed to the office of chair. And he gets to take over the seat next to me. Mayor Cote, this is up to you. Now that you're sitting in chair, you have the option of taking over for the election of vice chair, or I can continue. It's up to you.
You know, I think you've done a good job so far, so I'll let you finish off this
Terrible.
process.
Okay, next I'd like to open the nominations for the office of vice chair, and I'll accept any nominations put forward. Mary Harris.
Thank you. I'd like
Dr.
to
Harris.
nominate Jack Froese, position of vice chair.
Mayor Froese, do you accept the nomination?
Yes, I do.
And you consent to the nomination? And do you consent to the nomination?
Yes, I do.
Yes, you do. Okay. Are there any further nominations for the position of vice chair? Are there any further nominations for the position of vice chair? Hearing no further nominations, may I have a motion to close nominations for the office of Vice Chair? Second, all in favor? Great, I declare Mayor Froese acclaimed to the office of Vice Chair. Thank you, congratulations to both, and now there is no further excuse to not pass the chair of this meeting back to the new chair of the Mayor's Council, Mayor Cote.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Mike, and welcome everyone. Certainly not as exciting as some of the elections that we've recently gone through this past fall. So, really excited about working with each and every one of you over the next term on Mayor's Council. I think it's going to be a really exciting time for us. I did want to take a moment to just recognize actually a few of our past chairs, Mayor Corrigan, Mayor Robinson, and Mayor Walton, the past 3 chairs who have been instrumental over the past 8 years of really putting TransLink and the Mayor's Council in a really strong position that we are today. And I truly believe we are in a really exciting time here in Metro Vancouver. Our region is leading North America in public transit growth over the past 4 years, and we have renewed interest and investment from both the provincial and federal government. I think we're going to have to play a critical role to be able to seize upon that interest and investment, and no doubt we're going to have to play an important role to help guide and manage the investments that have occurred. So really looking forward to serving with Mayor Froese in this position, and I think there's going to be some tremendous opportunities for this group. So with that, we're going to jump right into to the agenda. We're going to start with the adoption of the agenda.
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded. Mayor Brody.
I've got a question. There's public delegates as number 7. And that's going to be after a lot of important business has been discussed. And I just wonder whether, Mr. Chair, we shouldn't have the delegates first.
Well, I think as newly elected chair, I wasn't involved in terms of the order of the agenda, but I think if it is the will of the body, and I certainly would entertain a motion to amend the agenda to have the open delegates first, if you would like to move
Okay,
that.
so I'll move to amend in that fashion to, I guess, to have it before the report of the TransLink management.
Okay, and I'll leave, Mike has a comment.
I certainly think that would work, and I see a lot of the public delegates here. I would note that we might want to leave space in the agenda for public delegates who may not actually be present yet because they didn't anticipate being on the agenda until later, and that way, if there are any others, we can come back to them later in the meeting.
Sure.
Okay, so we'll take that as a motion to amend the agenda. Is there a seconder?
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We'll just move to 3.2, which is approval of the minutes. Past meeting. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And we are now going to go to item number 7, the public delegates.
Great. I'll just get our list here. Want to go through it, or do you want me to go through that?
Sure.
Here, I'll introduce this item. So we had 10 delegates wishing to speak to us as outlined in the report on page 66, and I'll flip to it in the screen in a second. As background for new members here, public participation at these meetings is valued and welcomed. As per our rules of procedure, interested members of the public can apply to speak up to 2 days prior to our meeting, and we receive public delegations only in those matters within the authority of the Mayor's Council. Up to 1 hour is set aside at open meetings to receive public delegations, and in fact today we have with 10 delegates, we have a full schedule of applicants. We also include a provision to receive written submissions in lieu of those appearing before us, either because our agenda is full, or as it is today, or because a member of the public is unable to attend. So there's a report on page 66. We actually received 2 written submissions. One's in the report. One was distributed loose leaf just underneath the report on the table in front of you. And let me just flip through these slides here quickly. So delegates can prepare yourselves and arrange yourselves accordingly. I'll just note the speaking order on the screen. There is nothing secret on any of these screens. This is all in your agenda package, so media don't have to take quick shots of what's coming. So this is our order of delegates as they were received in terms of order of application. Each of you have 5 minutes to present to council. And I'll just note as a general rule, there are no questions or discussions with council. And maybe I'll pass it back to the chair to welcome the first speaker.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So welcome all of the speakers that have come to join us. And I'm going to call up our first speaker, Imtiaz Papat, to please join us.
If he is present.
If
And
he's-
if not, we can come back to him.
Are we here or?
Just over there. The table. Yeah, the table.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Welcome to the Mayor's Council. Okay, here I am. So I'm with the Save Green Timbers Urban Forest Alliance, and I want to really caution you with this deliberation this morning. You're talking about putting Skytrain through green timbers and down Fraser Highway. It's very concerning for us, the construction and the damage it will cause to the ecology of the forest. And of course, the Fleetwood Business Improvement Association is also concerned about having Skytrain through their neighborhood and calling it a noisy monstrosity. So we're concerned about the construction and what damage that will do to the forest, but also the noise factor that will remain as a legacy. So we're urging the Mayor's Council to do a environmental impact study of the damage that might cause to the Green Timbers urban forest, and do due diligence to look at other options for transportation for the city of Surrey. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'll call up our second speaker, Anita Huberman. Is Anita here?
I do not see her, so I'd suggest we can add her to
We
the
can
end of
come
the agenda.
back. The next speaker I have is Peter Ladner. Is Peter here? No, we'll move along. Mike Soren.
He's actually
En route. Okay. Alex Boston. Christina Ilnici. Adrian Cook. Sorry.
Cool. I thought I would have a little bit of time to continue working on this while I was sitting there, but I guess not. Thank you, Mayor's Council, for providing this forum here today. And congratulations on the re-elected mayors and newly elected mayors. So, I'm Adrian Crook. I'm a founding member of Abundant Transit BC. ATBC is a nonprofit advocacy group focused on promoting freedom of mobility as a universal human right, best served through high quality and widespread public transit. It is said that every housing decision is a transportation decision, and the inverse is also true. Transportation decisions that you make here today will shape how our region lives and grows for generations. Questions like Skytrain or LRT, or a subway to UBC or free transit for kids under 18 should first be evaluated through the lens of building sustainable cities in our region. Rather than ask the cost of delivering abundant transit, we should ask, what is the cost of the status quo? And that cost is about 26 trillion globally. That's the global cost of our status quo over just the next 12 years, according to a recent report from the Global Commission on the Economy and Climate. The world is set to spend over 90 trillion on infrastructure before 2030. Most of the programming decisions for how that money is spent will be made over the next few years. By shifting to sustainable technologies in our cities and transportation, we can save up to 26 trillion globally in increased productivity, innovation, and reduced healthcare cost. If we're serious about building sustainable, climate-resilient cities, we must reframe the how do we pay for it question to the more appropriate how do we pay if we don't do it question. I'm looking forward to 4 years of working alongside all of you, albeit not in a paid capacity, to help bring about abundant, sustainable transportation for our region. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Brad Kavanagh. Is Brad here?
Good morning, mayors, directors, and chief. My name is Brad Kavanaugh. I'm a resident of New Westminster. Congratulations, Mayor. And I'm here to speak with you about, shockingly, transit. Specifically about how you as leaders in the community can act to provide an abundance of transit for a wider range of residents in our region. I'm not here to talk about mega projects. Skytrain lines, gondolas to SFU, Beeline bus routes, they're all obviously important parts of our transportation system. But I'd like to speak about 3 smaller and less flashy improvements that can make a big difference in making transit accessible for more people. First, as alluded to by Adrian, free transit for kids. Based off of responses from the Transit Fare Review last year, the Mayor's Council approved having staff explore expanded discounts through discussions with the provincial government. And that's great, but we shouldn't be asking if we can afford it. We can. We can always find ways to pay for things that we value. Do we value giving families a break when they want to take the SkyTrain to Rocky Point Park to get some ice cream? Do we value allowing kids to get to school for free? Do we value making life more affordable for Metro Vancouver families? I would like to ask that should a report about supplying transit for free to children come to this council again, ask yourselves why we are not already doing it. Toronto has been doing it since 2015, and the year after they introduced it, they saw a doubling in the number of children taking transit. They clearly value this. Edmonton recently started doing it. And I'm going to read a quote from Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkin when that city's council unanimously voted to provide free transit passes for all Seattle public high school students. We need to make transit safer, more reliable, and more accessible for all. As demand for transit in Seattle grows, we need to develop more innovative, flexible strategies to give more options for all Seattle residents. Do we value making transit safer, more reliable, and more accessible for all, like Seattle does? If Toronto values it, if Edmonton values it, if Seattle values it, then why can't we? Let's get all on board and make free transit for children a priority in Metro Vancouver. Second, I'd like to talk about bus stops, and more specifically, accessible bus stops. Across Metro Vancouver, only 3/4 of bus stops are wheelchair accessible. That's nearly 2,000 bus stops where a person using a wheelchair is excluded from using public transit. This is unacceptable. Coast Mountain Bus Company has a granting program called Transit-Related Road Infrastructure Program, or TRIP, that cost shares 50% of the cost of making a bus stop accessible. Now, the cost for doing this is minuscule. In New Westminster, in the last 10 years, the city retrofit 90 bus stops for a total of about $350,000. That's only $4,000 per bus stop. I want to ask you, as mayors of your cities and as members of the Mayor's Council here, to take a serious look at this small amount of money that we can spend to help make accessible transit a priority. Do we value breaking down barriers for our friends and neighbors who use wheelchairs or other mobility devices? Third, bus shelters and benches. They don't do much other than shelter people from the sun and the wind and the rain while they're waiting for a bus. They provide a place to sit for people who maybe can't walk as far as they used to, or who have bags of groceries after doing some shopping for the week. They're used as a place to put up posters for community events. They attract more people to use transit and can result in more patrons for shops, and generally result in more street activity. Okay, they actually do a lot. And they help make transit more appealing and comfortable for people to use, which is why I'm shocked that the Regional Transit Authority doesn't have any sort of funding available to cities to help shoulder the cost of installing them. If I can make a third recommendation, and that's kind of why I'm sitting here, I'd ask that you consider asking staff to examine introducing a funding program similar to CMBC's TRIP granting program. A bus shelter costs, $10,000 to $20,000. And that's a little money that goes a long way towards making transit more appealing to a senior going home from the senior center, or a student waiting in the rain to catch the bus to school. Do we value making transit more comfortable for everybody? That's 3 small things. They're not flashy, and there aren't a lot of ribbons to cut, unless you feel like cutting a ribbon for every bus shelter that you install. But these small steps can go a long way to providing a transit system that is abundant, accessible, comfortable, and easier to use by a wide range of people. And they show that we as a society put value in such a transit system. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much. Our next speaker is Daryl Dela Cruz. Is Daryl here?
And Anita Huberman just arrived, so she's ready to speak.
Okay, we'll go to the next one. Greg Thomas. Is Greg Thomas here?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Congratulations to all the incoming mayors. Your worships, good morning.
We'll probably just move you just slightly over to the microphone to the
Yeah,
one with the light
sure.
on. Yeah, perfect.
How's that? Okay.
Thank you.
My name is Dr. Greg Thomas. I'm the immediate past chair of the Surrey Board of Trade. I'm also a director at the Abbotsford Airport, and I'm also an owner and an employer in Surrey. I'm not going to talk to you this morning about the numerous statistics about operational and construction costs around light rail or Skytrain. I'm not going to talk about the years of planning and tens of thousands of hours of volunteer and professional time spent and billions of dollars of allocated funding waiting to be used. I'm not going to talk about a process that, if altered, will fly in the face of best available science, years of methodical decision-making, and the public consultative process, not to mention the need for serious additional funds. What I do want to share with you this morning is a vision for a city that evolved through careful planning, careful consideration, and a long-term perspective. As many of you know, Surrey is a very large city. It's geographically divided. Surrey has many regional centers that are isolated from one another, and to traverse the city by bus or car is very difficult. It takes a lot of time and is often impractical. Businesses and citizens of Surrey have wanted and needed a transit system that connects east-west and north-south. A system that uses state-of-the-art technology to move people efficiently across their city while enabling them to see at eye level their businesses and the local landscape. Light rail filled this need. Many, many, many other cities in the world, much larger and busier than Surrey, use light rail successfully every day. Very few use Skytrain. The city and other people and organizations like the Surrey Board of Trade have supported this vision, and after careful planning and consultation, have reviewed many other options and types. Let's be clear, we're talking about two phases of this project. Phase 1, which was the 104th King George route, or the L route, and Phase 2, which is the Fraser Highway route. Now, I know many of you mayors are just getting accustomed to your job and your role, but we really need to pay attention to the details here. You have a very difficult decision to make. Phase 1 planning is well underway, and the monies have already been allocated. This phase needs to proceed. It was never clear or certain what would happen in Phase 2, whether Skytrain would be extended there or not, and I understand why many people might prefer that route. To me, this decision that should go to the people, and it should be evaluated by the people. If that is their wish, not simply be left to an incoming mayor and council to make that decision. However, Phase 1 is part of a larger vision to connect and build the city, eventually establishing much more light rail for the city and to connect the city east, west, north, south, and to get people out of their cars and reduce carbon emissions. Skytrain is old technology, it's extremely noisy and costly, and does not provide the connectivity that Surrey desperately needs. It is simply a point-to-point system intended to get people from Langley and Surrey down to Vancouver. It does not build a city. Surrey may have elected a new mayor and council, but the election was not a referendum on light rail. The simple fact is most people in Surrey did not vote. I urge the mayors and the council here to support the vision for light rail in Phase 1 and in the future as well to connect and diversify our city. And if Phase 2 is a Skytrain vision, then let the citizens of Surrey make that decision. I thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, we've gotten through the list of speakers. I understand Anita Huberman is here.
After she's done, I want to just check if there's anyone else on the list.
Thank you so much. I'm Anita Huberman. I'm CEO of the Surrey Board of Trade. Thanks for allowing me the opportunity to speak this morning. The Board of Trade, we support and attract business to Surrey as a city-building business organization. We represent approximately 6,000 business contacts. We've been in Surrey since 1918. Transportation and education are the economic foundations of building Surrey's thriving and vibrant city. Surrey will be the largest city in British Columbia very soon. And to emphasize, we're an independent business organization, and the Surrey Board of Trade is within our mandate and rights to voice our perspective. As part of the approved Mayor's Regional Transportation Plan, the Surrey Board of Trade supports light rail transit, leading-edge technology to connect Surrey's town centers, to make Surrey the destination. You can fit Vancouver, Richmond, Burnaby in the city limits of Surrey. We need light rail transit, which is part of the approved transportation plan, to connect Guildford, Newton, Fleetwood, and eventually spread out to the other town centers of Surrey, including Cloverdale and South Surrey. Bus rapid transit will not accomplish connecting each of the town centers to each other and connecting within each of the town centers to create art and culture hubs, new businesses, an urban environment that inspires livability, bicycle options. The Surrey Board of Trade is leading the charge in making Surrey a music city destination. Musicians and those that support them need light rail transit to get around our great city of Surrey. Employers and employees want a livable city. We don't want simply a SkyTrain from Langley to Vancouver. Surrey will be missed. 1/3 of Surrey's population is under the age of 19. They too need to get around our city to live, play, learn, and work. For all of you, the Mayor's Regional Transportation Plan is approved, including Phase 1 of LRT. Let's build it. If it is the will of this council to have SkyTrain on Fraser Highway, do this in Phase 2. If the plan is changed, which already it took several years for this approved plan to get it approved, to negotiate, to ensure your accountability through public engagement, all the business planning, costing, technical specifications. Again, if the plan is changed, Surrey will have to wait again for needed transportation improvements. How much longer does Surrey have to wait? We've been waiting since the mid-'80s. You have funding from all levels of government already approved. Money has been spent on this unprecedented regional transportation plan. I implore you, all of you, to get on with this plan that's already approved. Build LRT in Phase 1. Some points to consider is without LRT, the traffic on King George into Newton is going to become more gridlocked. It will be a lot longer to build SkyTrain to get to Langley than LRT. What is unknown is the taxpayer impact to both businesses and residents if the SkyTrain project is to proceed down Fraser Highway. And how, in today's economic situation, with all the demands being made for funding, can government justify having the city throw away the $20 million already invested in LRT and the $50 million spent by TransLink on this transportation plan, on LRT? The indication that SkyTrain will replace LRT is misleading, as the proposed SkyTrain route down Fraser Highway does absolutely nothing for the valued town centers of Newton and Guildford. The Board of Trade supports the work that Surrey has undertaken for transit and urban land use planning for LRT and the town centers, and transportation and land use go together. We rarely travel just for the purpose or pleasure of moving. LRT is about local access. Skytrain is about regional access. We need both, but clearly the priority for growing Surrey was to shape that growth to be more transit-oriented, to be denser, to have more destinations.
So thank you, Anita. We have come to the end of the time.
Thank you very much.
Now I understand Daryl Dela Cruz is now here.
Good morning to all of the mayors, to the Honorable Chair Johnson Cote, and to the Vice Chair, and to, of course, everyone here present. My name is Daryl Dela Cruz, and if you don't already recognize me, I am the founding director and chair of a citizens group called Skytrain for Surrey. Over the past several years, our group has been contributing to raising an incredible discussion in the cities of Surrey and Langley regarding the rapid transit future that will shape our city for generations. This is a system that will serve our city for decades to come. And on behalf of those who joined our campaign, I would like to express a thanks to everyone on board who will be making a decision in the next couple of rounds of discussion. Of course, it's pretty evident what I'm going to be here to address, which is the impending decision to potentially adopt a Surrey to Langley Skytrain extension. We are here to stand together with, of course, our elected representatives in supporting this decision to adopt a 16-kilometer extension of the Skytrain, and we are also pleased to see that the draft resolution that's been put forward by the TransLink board or management, I would not know who's necessarily, includes the discussion on the future of rapid transit on King George Boulevard and 104th Avenue, in addition to the line serving Fraser Highway. We're here to support the suspension of the Surrey Newton Guildford LRT. Part of our discourse in the city of Surrey and Langley was to raise awareness of several issues with the proposed plan for street-level light rail. And make no mistake, if the Surrey Newton Guildford LRT had been built, we would be building Canada's slowest urban rail line when it opens in the year 2023. We believe it would have offered questionable benefits for the city of Surrey and few benefits outside of the city of Surrey, if at all. On the other hand, the proposed extension from Surrey to Langley integrates with the regional system and has humongous benefits that could be posed, not only for the residents of Surrey and Langley, but for people around the region who will benefit from improved access to south of Fraser communities, and on the converse, south of Fraser residents who will benefit from improved access to the entire region. And these benefits will also be seen within south of Fraser cities, who will see faster commutes within our town centers from city to city. Of course, we're aware that in the cities of Surrey and Langley, the growth in vehicle use has been remarkably faster than any other place in the region. Skytrain is the right system to increase transit ridership significantly by providing transit users with an alternative that will have a considerable advantage that will give considerable advantages for those riding transit by offering service that is faster than taking a private automobile. The network benefits from increased length, which will be seen in Surrey and Langley as transit ridership increases alongside fare revenue and regional access increases, which will, of course, improve the chance for economic development. We believe that the recent rejection, which was unanimous at Surrey City Council and was a result of the election of the new City Council, goes beyond a sentiment that Surrey deserves the best system or to be on the same level as the rest of the region, since residents were well informed about the flaws of the proposed light rail. We've heard a sentiment that the City of Surrey in their previous government didn't do well enough to sell LRT, and we in turn have questioned whether there was a case to sell LRT at all. We are urging the Mayor's Council to follow through and incorporate the Surrey Langley Skytrain in the vision, within the current funding envelope and consider, of course, as stated in the resolution, the stage implementation between Phase 2 and Phase 3. We are also hoping that the Mayor's Council and all bodies in charge can direct TransLink staff to examine the feasibility of options such as at-grade running and other cost-saving measures so that we can deliver this service faster to the Surrey and Langley residents. In summary, of course, we're proud to be here today in conjunction with our elected representatives, or at least I'm proud to be here to represent everyone, and we look forward to the decision that will be made in due time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, I'm just going to ask if there's any speakers that are on the list up there. If anyone has come late there, please give me some kind of signal to indicate that you're here. If not, we will actually defer, and we will resume open delegation after at the regular scheduled time, because I think some of the folks had planned for that portion of the meeting to come a little bit later. So we are going to move along on the agenda, and next is a report from TransLink Management.
Good morning, members of the Mayor's Council, and welcome. I've met a few of you so far, and I look forward to meeting all of you in due course when your calendars can allow. We want to congratulate you on behalf of the TransLink staff for your election and joining the Mayor's Council. Welcome back, of course, our previous mayors for the Mayor's Council as well, and I want to congratulate Mayors Cote and Froze for sending to the chair and vice chair. You certainly have a big responsibility because we have a big agenda going forward, absolutely. And we have a lot of momentum. Up until this date, over the last couple of years, we've built tremendous agenda, primarily through the work of this group for so many different reasons going forward to get us to the point of fully funding some $9 billion in investment going forward, and much of the mayor's 10-year vision. But we have a long way to go to fully fund the mayor's vision. We, of course, have a significant issue before you today, which I won't directly speak to, and these remarks will save that for that presentation. But we very much look forward to you at TransLink, look forward as TransLink staff and working with you in the many months ahead. So speaking of momentum, probably the most important indicator, if you will, of the success, I think, of a transit system in terms of my career in this business is ridership. And we are on an absolute remarkable 3-year ridership trend here in the Lower Mainland and Metro Vancouver. It very much speaks to a very strong economy over the last number of years. British Columbia continues to lead Canada as the strongest provincial economy. High gas prices certainly contribute to our ridership trend, but it also is because of more and better service. And that more and better service is the result of the work that this body and the Mayor's Council has done over many years, starting with the creation of the Mayor's Vision in 2014 through the approvals and through our delivery of that service. And it's also because of the astonishing development around our Skytrain network and even along our frequent transit network. That is, I think, the envy of Canadian and U.S. transit systems, our transit-oriented development. It's something we can be very proud of, but it is certainly having some significant contribution to the ridership trend. So over almost the last 3 years, we've seen some 17% growth in ridership. By the end of 2016, as we were just implementing the Evergreen line, we saw a 4.5% increase in ridership, really the beginning of that bow wave. And then in 2017, 5.7%. That 5.7% increase was by far and away the largest transit increase of any major metropolitan region in Canada and the United States, by a long shot. In fact, most major metropolitan regions in Canada and the United States have seen flat or declining ridership. Now that trend is continuing with an even more robust, through September of this year, 6.5% increase in ridership. And again, we continue to lead Canada and the United States on that mark. And I think it very much shows that we hit the timing just right. with the funding of the Mayor's Plan, our ability to start delivering the Mayor's Plan immediately as we were seeing that latent demand really start to populate our system. We are seeing ridership increases across every one of the modes of our service. And in some respects, most importantly, at least through this year, that ridership growth is being led by our bus system. And the bus system remains the meat and potatoes, the really backbone of the transit system in this region. In fact, our bus system represents about 60% of the daily ridership at TransLink. We're carrying over 1.3 million boardings a day, which represents more than 500,000 individual people actually using the transit system. The ridership growth for all the modes of service so far this year is very similar to that 6.5%. And as I said, it is across the board. Expo and Millennium Line, 5.8%, Canada Line, 5.1%, Cbus, 5.8%, West Coast Express, a very, very healthy 6.8%. West Coast Express declined a little bit in the year after Evergreen opened, which was not surprising because then people in Port Moody and Coquitlam had a choice, but it has rebounded very, very strongly, naturally showing the demand for service farther into the Valley, Pitt Meadow, Port Moody, Maple Ridge, and so forth. And Handy Dart, we're seeing an over 5% increase in ridership. There are success stories throughout the region in terms of the types of services that we've been improving with your funding, with your support from the Mayor's Council, and as we go forward with you in the months ahead, we'd be happy to share some of that more detailed information. Now, with that robust growth in ridership, in point of fact, we're doing our best now just to keep up with that demand curve. And as we begin to engage with you, and I think you'll hear in Mike's subsequent presentation on the work plan, we need to get moving with trying to get Phase 3 funded. 17% growth in ridership, 6.5% annual growth in ridership. That's we're barely keeping pace, in fact, with the ridership, with the service increases that we are able to implement. This region is growing. You all know that. We're facing about 1 million more people in this region over the next 20 to 30 years. We need to get moving with the service improvements. Now, my philosophy as the CEO of TransLink is that we're the delivery agency. You make policy. Our policymakers here at the Mayor's Council and our Board of Directors make policy. It is our job to implement the policies that you give us, and in this case, the profound responsibility to implement this $9 billion in transit improvements. And I can tell you today we are right on target in implementing so far. We are now nearing the end of the second year of the so-called Phase 1 plan that was adopted by the Board and the Mayor's Council in November of 2016. Just to run you through very quickly what we are delivering and keeping right on track. This is our accountability dashboard, if you will, for the Mayor's Plan. It's published on our website, and it's something we pay attention to at staff very closely. First and foremost, so far we've already implemented some 275,000 hours of bus service on our fixed route bus system and our community shuttle network. And by the end of next year, which is the end of the first phase of the plan, we will have added some 500,000 hours of service, or about a 10% increase in service. We are right on schedule. And one of the things I was most proud of, immediately after we implemented, immediately after the Board and the Mayor's Council adopted the Phase 1 plan, we were right on it. We started adding service almost immediately. In the bus system, of course, as I said, 60% of our ridership, it was really important to start showing citizens of this region, taxpayers of this region, our customers, some value for their new dollars. So those improvements have been made. In order to make that happen, we've had to buy a lot more buses. We've had to replace buses that are 16, 18 years old, and we needed to add to the size of our fleet. So far, we have either taken delivery for or have contracts for some 545 conventional buses. Those are the 60 and 40-foot conventional buses, our community shuttles, as well as handy dart vehicles. The vast majority of those vehicles are clean energy, compressed natural gas buses and diesel battery hybrid buses. So we're very focused on reducing our emissions and reducing our energy use. We're also introducing new product lines. here at TransLink. And these 32 double-decker buses that will be arriving in the third quarter of next year will provide a more comfortable, more spacious, and I think even a little bit of a fun ride for people in our suburban routes in Delta, Surrey, and White Rock. So we're very much looking forward to that new fleet arriving. And continuing on with our sustainability commitment, in the second quarter of next year, we will start our first pilot of 4 zero-emission battery buses. They will operate between the 22nd Street SkyTrain station here in New Westminster on Marine Drive to the Marpole Transit bus loop in Vancouver. We're very much looking forward to that pilot. It is consistent with one of the mayor's plan objectives is creating a low-carbon fleet strategy for TransLink. We'd be happy to talk about that in some detail with you at a future meeting. We've been doing great work on the B lines, and my hat's off to all of the cities. We've been out working with all 11 jurisdictions that these 4 B lines pass through for many months so far this year. We're getting great response and great support from each of the cities. Why do we need your help? We operate on your rights of way. And one of the hallmarks of something like B-Line, which is our beginning high-capacity bus service, is speed and reliability. Can we make the buses move faster? Can we make the buses more reliable? If we can do that, we will drive market share. We will drive ridership. And again, we're doing great work with the cities, more work to do, but we should be implementing all 4 of those B lines by this time next year. In order to add all of this transit service, one of the biggest things we're working on, and it's a tricky one, and it's going to be a tough one going forward, is hiring a lot of new bus operators. Over the last 12 months or so, we've hired some 400 new bus operators each year through 2021. Which is the end of the phase 2 plan. We have to hire about 500 new bus operators, about equal portions for the expansion of the system and to deal with retirements in the bus operator ranks. Big responsibility. We're pulling out all the stops and being as creative as we can to attract new recruits to drive our buses. And of course, a 30% increase in Handy-Dart service through the end of the phase 2 plan. Very, very important. We've been making improvements in that service. We're seeing it show up in ridership gains on Handy-Dart for our seniors and people with disabilities. C-Bus service, C-Bus and SkyTrain were the first 2 service improvements we made in January of 2017. We've seen great response in ridership to the North Shore. Our third C-Bus is being built now in the Netherlands. It will be arriving in the spring and should be put into service in the summer, late summer, which will allow us to get to at least 15-minute peak frequency throughout the peak period and beyond. On the rail side, in order to continue to improve capacity of the Expo Millennium Line and the Canada Line, we are ordering new cars. 24 cars are being built in South Korea right now for the Canada Line. They will begin arriving in late 2019 and into service throughout 2020. 56 additional what we call our Mark III cars for the Expo Millennium Line. The first actually train set, the first 4 cars is here now in testing. The second train set is on its way from the manufacturing plant. We will start rolling out this additional equipment during the course of next year. Between the Canada Line and the Expo Millennium Line, these new cars, all air-conditioned and quieter, will allow us to increase capacity anywhere from 10 to 30%, depending on time of day and which portion of the system. We're beginning procurement for new equipment to support the state of good repair of West Coast Express and ultimately to allow us to increase capacity along the line. We are working with the province to get started on procurement for the Broadway subway, the extension of the Millennium Line. That is a provincial project now. That was part of the agreement we reached with the province in terms of both the Surrey project and the SkyTrain extension. Province over the years has taken the responsibility for building SkyTrain. We expect that procurement to start soon, and hopefully, if all goes according to plan, the Broadway extension will be operational by 2025. As directed by this body, and we'll talk a lot more about this later, we've been diligently moving forward with the Surrey Newton-Guilford light rail line. We got that to procurement readiness, meeting all of our obligations. More to come on that. And while not on the list and no longer our responsibility, it was actually mentioned in the mayor's plan as the Patello Bridge. That is now in procurement. It is a provincial project. At this point in time, we will retain full responsibility for the existing structure until the new structure comes online, hopefully around 2023. Now, very importantly, of course, growing our market share, growing our ridership, very important to us, but investing in the system, investing in the state of good repair is incredibly important to us here at TransLink. And that's particularly on the Skytrain side. Skytrain's now about 32 years old. We do not want to be in the same position that many rapid transit systems are worldwide, let alone here in North America, where we defer maintenance. I think one of the hallmarks of TransLink, with the help of the mayors over the many years, is to make sure we have proper funding to maintain our assets in a state of good repair. Some of the examples: the Metrotown station, after some years of reconstruction, opened earlier this year. We appreciate the patience of all our customers. It's hard to rebuild a station while we're continuing service all the time. Commercial Broadway station, also been under construction for a long time. We're expecting that to open up in the short weeks ahead, and the Surrey Central station early next year should reopen as well. One of the things that I think a lot about, as my staff knows, is escalators. Escalators are quite a bear to keep in operation, particularly when you're operating some of the equipment that is original equipment from the Expo line, over 30 years old. We started our first project within the context of what will be a 4-year rehabilitation of escalators throughout the Expo line at Granville Station some months ago. That is going well, and I'm pleased that actually the movement of people in and out of the station with most of the escalators out of service has so far been moving forward well. Those escalators that are now being rebuilt carried some 30,000 people a day. Going forward, and then starting next year, we will be proceeding with our escalator rehabilitation program. Some 37 original escalators will be replaced at 12 stations between 2019 and 2023. Skytrain, and keeping the Skytrain system operational within the few hours that we have overnight to do the maintenance is a vast responsibility. Some examples of that are some 54 kilometers of rail grinding so far this year, 2,500 rail pads. Why is that important? Well, it keeps the service reliable. It keeps the service quieter. You heard actually one of the speakers about Skytrain noise and so forth. These are the types of things we're doing to keep the system operational and in good shape. These are just some of the examples of a very, very large state of good repair program that we have going forward, and we'd be happy to talk more about that at your pleasure going forward. The third kind of pillar of our responsibilities, delivering the mayor's plan, state of good repair, obviously is customer experience, driving the customer experience. Being able to add service as robustly as we are right now with the mayor's plan is very important. It helps to attract and retain customers, but we have to do the little things as well. There are many, many different facets to the customer experience using our transit system, and we are highly focused on all those facets in order to attract and retain more riders, because after all, that's why we're here. That's why we have a transit system, is attract and retain more riders, grow our market share. It helps to alleviate and manage congestion in our system. Some of the examples of some of the things that are ongoing right now and that we're doing. It's also one of my favorite projects, new passenger information displays, exactly as you see in this image. They will start showing up at the end of this year and throughout next year. These will replace all the red signs that show what the destination of your Expo Millennium Line car will be, then with countdown on when the next train arrives. Very similar to the signs that we have on the Evergreen Line now and on Canada Line. We are modernizing, if you will, the customer information. Importantly as well, not only the signs on the platform, we are also installing passenger information displays outside the station, outside the paid zone. So if there's any disruption or something going on in the system, you will find out before you pay your fare. All of these signs will be implemented throughout next year and into early 2020. It will really transform, I think, in some respects, how people get information on the system. Other little things, we implemented live chat now about a month ago. There are a variety of different ways you can get information. Use our trip planner, call a person on the telephone. Decreasingly, people are doing that. Live chat is kind of in the middle. If you don't want to talk to someone on the phone or you can't get through, you can actually email and get your instructions on how to use our system. Our system can be somewhat daunting to new riders, or if they want to take a new trip, we like to find ways to make it easier to use the system and make it more accessible. Similarly, when there are disruptions, when something is going on, we need to push out alerts. Our alert system was a little kludgy. It wasn't as accurate as it could be, and I think the interfaces could have been better. About 6 or 8 weeks ago, we implemented significant improvements to our transit alert program and to the accessibility of the web page so you can sign up. Earlier this year in May, we were the first Canadian transit agency and only the second transit agency in North America to implement what we call open payments. So we, of course, want most of our customers, and we believe Compass is still the right way to go, you having your Compass card. But for many irregular users, visitors to the system, being able to just tap your chip-enabled credit card, a Visa or MasterCard, or if you have a wallet on your phone and just to be able to tap in, you don't have to wait online. You don't have to fumble with our ticket vending machines. Already since we launched this program, we've got over 3 million taps going forward. So all of this, and in closing, is just to say that we are firmly focused here at TransLink on putting the customer first. We are firmly focused on a variety of menu of different things that we can do to improve the customer experience. We spent the greater part of this year putting this document together. It's our customer experience action plan. We pegged it between 2019 and 2025 when much of the significant improvements to the system through the Mayor's Plan are implemented. Going forward, we'd be delighted to share with you some of the contents of that report. Mr. Chair, that's my report.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Mr. Desmond. I'll now open it up to the floor for any questions. Mayor Stewart.
Just press the button on the right.
Well, that one. Okay, great. Thank you very much for your presentation. I think we, as you mentioned, we have a transit system that's the envy of North America, if not the world, and going in the right direction. I'd like to thank the previous mayors who have got us to this point, the Mayors Council, and really looking forward to working with everybody here. So we had a great overview of the infrastructure and what you're doing. Fantastic work. I am so impressed with the management team here as well as the staff. I took the number 23 bus to the Skytrain today, and when I want to find out what's going on in the city of Vancouver, I ride the number 3 because it takes me right through all the span of neighborhoods. One thing that I'd like to know more about is the staff. You know, we talk about infrastructure here and we talk about the investments that we're going to make, but our transit system's only as good as the people that are running it. And so perhaps you could give us a sense of you know, how the staffing's working and perhaps morale within TransLink itself. Thank you.
Well, that's a big question, Mayor Stewart, and thank you for that, and thank you for being on the 23 this morning, and I'm sure a lot of our residents will be bumping into you on the Route 3 going forward. Wow, how would I respond to that? We have over 7,000 people here at TransLink, and every single person here is in the service of our customer, one way or the other. You know, if you're a mechanic at CMBC, you have a customer, and that customer is the bus operator, if you will, because the bus operator needs a clean and operable bus to pull out every morning and to bring back in the evening so that that bus operator can provide excellent service to our customers each and every day. I've been in this business a long time. My previous job here, we were primarily a bus company. We did operate the light rail in Seattle as well, but CMBC is an organization of people. It's the largest portion of TransLink. The bus operators are the largest single work group within TransLink, and they're the interface with the customer. They are the frontline employee. So making sure that we provide the tools to our bus operators every day so that they're able to provide good service. And you know what? I happen to think it's probably the hardest job here in this organization. As I've learned in our business, being a bus operator in an urban setting is a tough job. They have to put up with a lot. Every time I'm on the bus, I always say thanks to the operator when I get off, and I'm very pleased that many of our customers do exactly that because they know it's a tough job for our operators. Similarly, our station attendants on Skytrain, the people you see at the stations. They have an interesting job. They have a multifaceted job. Their job is safety is number one. Their job is also helping customers, and of course, when there are disruptions in the system, managing. So they're very focused on providing that level of customer service. So we like to think we're a service organization. We're in the business of growing our ridership. Therefore, we have to provide a better customer experience, and that does start with our employees. So those are things that we are very much focused on here at headquarters at TransLink. You know, my very first coffee chat, I do a coffee chat in this room once a month. With all hands. You know, and the first thing I said to them, look, everybody here, we're a customer service organization. We're here to serve our operating companies. If you work in HR, if you work in IT, if you work in procurement, you are in the service of serving the operating folks, because the operating folks, that's where the rubber meets the road, you know, to use a trite statement. And that's my philosophy, and that's what we're trying to do each and every day. Yeah, as for morale, I like to think morale as well is always good. You know, after the plebiscite, morale wasn't so good around here. But I think a lot has changed in that time. And again, my hat's off to this group. You helped make that happen. I think you can walk with pride. That's why we wear these tees on our lapel now. And you're seeing more and more of our frontline employees wearing the tee, because I think we're proud of being here. We're proud of the service that we can provide to the people of the Lower Mainland every day. We are not perfect. We will never be perfect. We're going to have a bad day every once in a while, but we like to think we're going to have more good days than bad days. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the manager's report? If not, maybe if we can get just a motion to receive the report. All those in favor, opposed, carried. Next on the agenda is the proposed 2019 work plan. As I alluded to at the onset of this meeting, we have a very busy work year ahead of us, and I think a lot of opportunities. A lot of our past successes have been involved with advocacy during past provincial and federal elections, and as I suspect most people around this table are aware, there will be a federal election in 2019, so there's going to be an opportunity to start to open up those discussions as well too. So I'm going to pass it off to Mike to do a presentation on the 2019 work plan.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thought I'd move up here. I know it's very difficult for many of you to see the chair or me at the table. So this report that's in your agenda package proposes a work plan to guide the Mayor's Council's agenda and priorities for the coming year. It's presented for discussion and input. That way we can take the results back from the discussion. It can work with the chair to bring back a final work plan for consideration at the next meeting. So as the chair noted, at the beginning of each of the past 4 or 5 years, I think, the Mayor's Council has adopted a similar kind of work plan so that we can ensure that we focus our resources and especially your time. You only meet once a month. You have responsibilities in your own local councils. So we want to make sure we really focus those on absolutely the highest priorities for the coming year. There are obviously a range of secondary issues that do require your time and focus from time to time, and I'll talk about the report briefly mentions them, but we want to make sure that really we understand, and certainly I understand what your number one priorities are, so we can drive towards that agenda. It's in fact how you hold me accountable, how you hold TransLink accountable for providing the kind of advice you need and want, and then carrying out your directions. You see in the report the priorities from the last couple of years. There's last year's directions there, just to give you some context for the kind of workload and the direction you provided this group in the past. So just to get into the actual details of the report very briefly, I would suggest that the Mayor's Council is at a really important transition point for the region after more than a half-decade of effort. This body, and in fact the region's, achieved a consensus on its transportation expansion priorities. That's through the 10-year vision. We've secured $5 billion in senior government funding and then approved new regional funding to support all of those expansion priorities that in the vision. We've in fact begun rolling out, as you just heard Kevin talk about, the largest transit expansion in BC's history through the phase 1 and 2 plans of the 10-year vision. That together is going to deliver almost $10 billion in new transportation infrastructure and services in the region. And I just actually want to underscore a couple of those points. The first is how transformative the new federal government's commitments to transit funding was. to the prospects for the vision back in late 2015. Kevin just noted, the morale may have been low amongst TransLink's workforce following the referendum. I think that same thing was true around this table. And the new government's, the then new government's commitment to massively increasing federal funding for local infrastructure and especially transit infrastructure provided that springboard that we're able to actually come up with a new implementation plan for the vision and then start it. And then similarly, the new provincial government's commitment to fund 40% of all projects in the vision they made late last year again was a vital component to enabling us to move from the phase 1 plan, which you had approved in 2016, and into the much larger and more ambitious phase 2 plan of the 10-year vision. I don't think it's overstating it to say I don't think we'd be here looking at this kind of progress that we've made for the region without these funding partners. So it's on the solid foundation that we're going to be able to, I'd suggest that this group can advance the remaining elements that are currently unfunded in the 10-year vision and indeed update the regional transportation strategy, which is going to enable us to identify the future investments, the future priorities that can then in fact guide our work going forward. Fortunately, our stars are aligned in all that work. There have been times in the past here and in other regions across the country where there's a lot of momentum and a lot of energy and focus within the region, but you don't necessarily have federal or provincial partners to help you. That's not the case here, as I was saying, but I mean, the case remains today as it was, as it has been for the last couple of years. We have senior governments in Victoria and Ottawa that are both committed to expanding public transit in a way that's not been the case for many, many years. And I think it's worth noting that the stars are aligning in this respect, not just around funding, although that's really important, but we actually have both governments in both Victoria and Ottawa that are actually committed to acting as true partners, not just for funding, but working with us to achieve the kind of transit expansion that this region has been planning. So with as the chair just noted, we have a federal election coming up in October of 2019, and then obviously we have a provincial government with its own election outlook. And I would suggest that both governments recognize the value and importance of good transportation, not only to local communities, but also the value that good transportation, especially transit, plays in meeting some of their own provincial and federal responsibilities. You can think of a range of issues like immigrant settlement or public health, climate change, that all in fact require and depend on good local transit. All I have to say is that both governments, I believe, are going to continue to see the value of investing in transit. In fact, I don't believe that, and I think we can make a very good case that both governments need to continue to build on the investments they've made in the past and in fact extend those in the future. So that lines up with getting to the work plan priorities that are outlined in this report. All of the work that this region has done has been based on good planning, good regional planning, long-term planning, planning that's coordinated between transportation and land use. That's been the basis for almost all of the progress in this region for many years. So that's why obviously finalizing the regional planning process, including the phase 3 plan, the rest of the projects in the 10-year vision, which includes rail to EBC, as well as looking beyond the 10-year vision, which is really what the regional transportation strategy update process is for. Making sure we get those right. That's going to help make sure that both we as a region and then partner governments in Victoria and Ottawa understand where this region wants to go and needs to go. So that's certainly step one. Step two is, because of course plans are great, but you need you need the resources to implement them. So step two is certainly to secure the funding. And in fact, as the chair noted, with the federal election next year, it's a pretty important opportunity for us to make sure that all major parties make commitments to voters as part of their respective election platforms, so that they're ready to work as partners with us after the election. This is going to require a deliberative, intensive effort, starting almost immediately. Party machinery is out there in Ottawa already starting to prep for the election, so we're going to have to ensure that we're working right alongside their own timelines. And of course, at the same time, we're going to have to deepen and continue to build that relationship and engagement with the province so that they not only understand what our future priorities are, but they're in fact engaged in that planning work, so that they see that those future plans are not just ours for them to support, but that they're in fact theirs as well. And then finally, as is noted there, the investment plan process is something that we do here at TransLink and the Mayors Council, and that helps us structure the discussions here at the Mayors Council, identify options for our own regional revenue responsibilities. There's a number of other responsibilities. I wouldn't say secondary, but they're certainly for different flavor. We have a number of Mayors Council responsibilities around things like appointing board members, reviewing the executive compensation plan, and others that we do on an annual or regular basis that you'll see in coming agendas. The report flags that it's been 4 years now since our governing legislation has seen a substantial amendment, and typically after 3 or 4 years, a review of the legislation is done. There's often housekeeping items, so at the very minimum, there are a number of housekeeping items that many members of the Mayor's Council in the past have identified that really should be addressed in future more housekeeping amendments. I'd suggest that we actually need to start looking at those, and I know in the past there's been bigger questions around governance that that kind of discussion can serve as a structure. The last item isn't necessarily a work plan priority, but it's something that we're going to do right away, which is transitioning all the new members of the Mayor's Council to ensure that all of you who are new to this group understand what the roles and responsibilities of the Mayor's Council are, understand what TransLink does and how the transportation network works. So to that end, we've organized to begin right today. There's a workshop for new members right after this meeting. And indeed, as you see in the report, we're proposing to do a similar pattern after the next 3 or 4 meetings after the meeting, hold an orientation workshop with TransLink staff and others to provide opportunities to kind of do a bit more of a deeper dive to help you get started. And I know that I recognize and I understand all the new information that you're sucking in as new heads of council, both at your own local municipalities as well as at Metro Vancouver. As Kevin mentioned, we'll organize one-on-one briefings between TransLink and your own city staff and yourself. And we'll look at other things like study tours in the region so you start to see how things work on the ground. So that's my report, Mr. Chair. There are some recommendations in there to get us going. And then again, that the intention is to then bring back sort of a final work plan for consideration at the next meeting.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think before we jump into the recommendations, I do want to give an opportunity for members of the Mayor's Council to ask any questions that they have regarding the report or comments. Mayor Stewart?
Thank you very much for your report. I just wanted to emphasize what I've learned in my 11 days now as mayor is that it does seem like the senior levels of government are looking at us for guidance in terms of investment. So in my meeting with the Prime Minister, where we talked about transit, housing, and opioids, he did emphasize the importance of this body and that Ottawa would be taking direction from us. And then I would emphasize to us that we have a very short window in order to hit their final pre-election budget. So moving ahead is extremely important. Also meeting with the 2 ministers in Victoria, Claire Chavena and Minister Robinson, they also emphasized the guidance that they would take from this body. So, what we do here is really important, and so far this looks very good. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Mayor Harvey.
Oh, thank you, and thank you for the concise reports. Excellent information. I note on page 17 of 82, with regards to the next meeting on December 13th, that there is going to be a TransLink report on provincial consultation regarding the Massey Bridge. And I just had a meeting yesterday with the Minister of Transportation and actually discussed this with the Premier a couple of weeks ago and mentioned the importance of working with the Mayor's Council on the Massey Bridge issue. I would ask, Mr. Chair, if during that update in December, if staff could also prepare a backgrounder on the importance of the bridge and, importantly, the 99 corridor for goods movements, transit operations, etc. I think it would be helpful for the new members here to have a good backgrounder on the issue.
Yeah, well, I think we can definitely take that as noted and give direction. Although a project not directly under the control of the Mayor's Council, it is certainly a significant transportation project in the region, and I think bringing the entire Mayor's Council up to speed would be very useful. So we can certainly take that and give direction. Director Harris.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. I'm just going into Section A of the recommendation that's up there. I know it's not on the floor yet, but I had a question for you, Mike. I was happily surprised to see that completing a rail connection to UBC is in there, but I say surprised because my understanding was that we would complete the planning process, and I appreciate the fact that you separated that from the Phase 3 projects, because it is an important project, but it is indeed separate from Phase 3. And Phase 3, if I'm correct, includes the projects that would be funded within the 10 years. So my second surprise, and I'm wondering why it's in there, is if I go back to the vision, the Burnaby Mountain Gondola, if I read from the vision, says that this may require a high-capacity connection from the mountain to the near Skytrain station. This initiative requires further investigation and consultation, et cetera, and it is certainly not in the year 6 to 10 list of investments in the table. I would suggest, unless I have missed something, that the Burnaby Gondola be considered separately along with or in addition to the UBC line as you've done it, because I don't know how it got into that Phase 3, and maybe there's some clarification there. Thank you.
I'd maybe ask Jeff Cross, the VP of Transportation Planning and Policy, to answer.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Director Harris, for the question. So on the Burnaby Mountain Gondola, in the Mayor's vision, it provides the opportunity to advance a business case if it is financially positive and neutral to TransLink, that it wouldn't impose additional costs, then it could come forward within the time frame of the vision. So we had brought forward some preliminary analysis in the last year or so, and the direction from the Joint Planning Committee was to continue moving that project along, see if there was support from the City of Burnaby as well as senior governments that would then meet that litmus test. So that's how it's stated.
Good, thank you very much. I think in that case, it's just important to flag it, and in some way, simply not to just put it in there with beelines and all sorts of other things that are in a slightly different category. Thank you.
Yeah, and I included this list just to provide some examples, some color, so that people understand what's in the Phase 3 plan, because we haven't had a lot of discussion around it. So
they're just not
it's
all
easiest
equal.
enough to remove it, because there's other things that are going to be in the Phase 3 plan that don't necessarily appear there that we're obviously going to pursue as well.
Exactly, thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions from the Mayor's Council on this report? Mayor Brody.
Mike, what about mobility pricing? There's no mention of that. Shouldn't that be a part of the work plan?
It's actually, if you look in the agenda planning, I believe we have listed a report back from staff on next steps on mobility pricing. I'm just reviewing that myself, but that's certainly, you're right, sorry, that should be part of the completion of the vision, because of course that was something that was identified in the vision. So we'll need to make sure that when I come back with this at the next meeting, we include a more fulsome description of how the follow-up to the independent commission's report is going to happen, because of course the previous Mayor's Council provided fairly specific direction on how that follow-up should occur.
Mr. Chair, I'm just going to, when we get a motion on the floor, I'm going to suggest a couple tweaks to it.
Okay.
That would be one of them.
Okay, well, not seeing any further questions. Now we can actually entertain a motion to put on the table. There is a recommendation that has been outlined in the report. Okay, so the recommendation in the report has been moved. Is there a seconder? Second, Mayor Brody.
Mr. Chair, just in line with the comments that have been already brought up, I'm just suggesting a couple minor tweaks to this resolution. First of all, the point has been made about completion of a rail connection. I think what it should say, and I think what you meant, is planning for a rail connection, not completing it. That would give some, I've heard the explanation, but I think it would give some people the wrong idea. Secondly, in number one, I think we should add F, planning for mobility pricing, and G, we should add, in accordance with Mayor Harvey's suggestion, working with the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure on the improvement project for the Massey Tunnel. So I would move that as amendments to the motion on the floor.
So what I see is an amendment to add an F and G as has been outlined by Mayor Brody. Is there a seconder for that amendment? Second. It's been seconded. Okay. Any discussion on the amendment, Mayor Stewart?
Yeah, Mr.
Sorry,
Chair.
do you want to motivate?
Well, it is also changing the second bullet under number 1A to planning for a rail connection instead of completing a rail connection.
Okay.
That was part of my amendment motion.
Okay, so the amendment also includes the changes at the first part of the recommendation. Is everyone clear on the amendment that's being made? Okay, I'm not seeing any objections. So the amendment has been moved and seconded. Mayor Stewart.
Just on the amendment, my understanding is that we are actually completing the Broadway subway station to Arbutus. And that's complete a rail connection from the Broadway subway station at Arbutus is how that reads to me. With then perhaps there can be other wording added to in terms of UBC.
So I'm going to go back to Mayor Brody. Just
with respect, I think you've got to read the entire phrase. It says, planning for a rail connection from the Broadway subway station at Arbutus. So it's the Broadway station at Arbutus to UBC. So it's just the Arbutus to UBC component is the way I read it.
okay, Mayor West.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you read for me, through you, can I have the wording of the amendment with respect to mobility pricing, please?
So this is where I'm going to either look to the amendment there or the recording secretary, what has been recorded as the amendment.
By all means. Planning for mobility pricing. It was simple as that.
That was exactly it, to add item F, planning for mobility pricing.
Okay, thank you. I will not be able to support the amendment then. Planning for mobility pricing suggests to me that mobility pricing is going to happen. If there is a desire to have an evaluation of mobility pricing and whether or not that should occur, I think that's an entirely separate thing. But planning for mobility pricing would suggest to me that it is a fait accompli and something that I'm not in support of. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Prose.
Yeah, thank you for that. Just for Mayor West, you do have the opportunity to have that point separated so you don't, so you can still vote for the plan, but we could separate that one point if you wish, and then that way, we don't, you're in favor of the plan, but that part, I can understand you may not be in favor.
I will definitely separate the different components of the amendment to be voted on separately. Mayor McCallum.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for separating them because I'm certainly opposed to the change in the, I guess, second dot one. So can I speak on that at this time, or are you going to do it each amendment?
So you can speak to the entire amendment at this time, yeah. So any one of the three components.
I'm opposed to the amendment, and in particular to the second dot that you have under A, because I think the wording that's in this work plan is the right wording, and so therefore I'll be voting against the amendment.
Okay. Director Harris.
Thanks very much. In a similar vein, I think we need to actually look what we're looking at. The motion does not read that we are going to complete the line to UBC in 10 years. What it reads, and I think we need to go back to what it originally was, it needs to secure funding, senior government funding, for projects that they're currently unfunded, and that includes the line, the extension to UBC, which was indeed included in the vision. It doesn't say that we're going to be building it out. That's why it's separate from phase 3. So I think I would not support the amendment to that because I think we need to separate out what we're completing. We're looking for the additional senior government funds to complete the line, and we're looking for that funding within the 10-year period. So I think I would like to get that separated as well, because I think I'd like to go back to the original wording. Thank you.
Okay, and I don't think we should get too hung up on the very specific wording. The final work plan is going to come back for discussion, and I'm actually not convinced the intent of what staff is any different between the different positions, particularly the first one. There's a lot of work regarding all of these projects that will have to go forward, and I don't want to get too hung up particularly on the specific wording, because I think regardless we are going to no doubt get reports back. Mayor Stewart.
I'd just like to echo Director Harris's remarks as well as Mayor McCallum's remarks. I think the wording as is should be the way it goes forward. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm now going to go to a vote on the amendment, and I am going to separate the three different components. The first one was regarding the changes to 1A and relating to the change of wording from the connection to the Broadway subway line to UBC. So with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, that portion of the amendment is defeated. The second portion related to the planning of mobility pricing, and this one I might actually just look to the mover of that motion, because the suggestion was made that it might be better put to evaluate mobility pricing, and I think that might be a better way to achieve consensus at this particular junction. Would you be comfortable with making that amendment to that amendment?
Further evaluate?
Yes.
Further evaluate, sure. Because we
Okay.
have evaluated.
Yeah. So to further evaluate mobility pricing, and I think that's to Mayor West's point. So I am going to accept that as an amendment based on the feedback. So we are going to vote on the motion to further evaluate mobility pricing, which is a change to the original wording. And I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And finally, the final component G related to work related to the Massey crossing there. So I'm going to call the question on that. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And now we're back to the original motion. Are there any other further comments or discussion on the complete motion and work plan for 2019, which I will remind everyone will be coming back for a more thorough discussion at our next Mayor's Council meeting in 2019 to set and finalize. Not seeing any, I'm going to call the question. Mayor Buchanan.
Thank you very much, Mayor Cote. Through you to Mr. Buda. I'm just curious, before the regional transportation study moves forward, is there any business case evaluations that are done to look at the region's most critical transit investments?
Well, I mean, typically business cases on specific projects aren't complete until they either appear in a investment plan or this body directs that we've got enough consensus and we have funding, if not confirmed, at least on the road to being confirmed, that we'd start that. But I think maybe perhaps to the intent of your question, that the regional transportation strategy process, which will take probably over a year, it's going to be a bit of an iterative process, and this body and the TransLink board will start to identify the priorities that go beyond the vision, and that will have to sort of inform, frankly, a lot of this work, for example, around securing funding. So I would say that it's kind of an iterative process. We'll need to start narrowing down what our priorities are, figuring out how much money we need to raise, start communicating that with other governments, but then at the same time, keep working towards finalizing that new RTS process. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. And I'm just curious, then from that, would we be using consistent business case evaluations, how we've done it in the past? Will it be consistent as we move forward?
Absolutely, and that'll actually part of the orientation workshop that we'll probably do following the next meeting that can dig into the planning frameworks that we use, which include the kind of evaluation processes that we follow that are actually fairly rigorous and based on metrics. You can look at and TransLink has an excellent regional transportation model and systems planning models that allow this group and subgroups or individual local governments to look at how different potential solutions might impact travel times and demands in the region. All of that data-driven analysis comes back and helps to inform any decisions that are made in how we do planning.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor Cote. I think I've read a little bit further and answered my own questions, so thank you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, that brings to the end, but I do appreciate the comment from Mayor Buchanan. I know we focus a lot of the work on the current mayor's 10-year plan, and that plan certainly has served this region very well, but I think this mayor's council is going to have the really interesting opportunity to actually say what comes next, because I think we all recognize the planning doesn't stop at that plan, and I think that's going to be a major component of our work in the upcoming years. So with that, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, so moving on to item number 6, which is a report on south of the Fraser. south of the Fraser Rapid Transit. No doubt this report and discussion is in response to a new position from the newly elected city council in the city of Surrey. I know myself have gone through a bit of a process coming to terms with the change of direction. I think we recognize in any project that we do here in the region with TransLink, you do need to have strong partnerships with the host municipality and the support there. So I think no doubt we do need to revisit this particular discussion, and I recognize it's a bit challenging because this is a pretty significant discussion we're going to be having on the first meeting of a new mayor's council with a lot of new folks on the table, but it is very time sensitive. So I'm going to pass it off to Kevin Desmond and Jeff Cross to introduce and present this report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, and those were good. I think that was good setup as well for the discussion that's going to happen now. Over the past number of years, we at TransLink here have been focused on a plan that would deliver 27 kilometers of light rail to Surrey and eventually to Langley. The idea in the mayor's plan was to do it over in 2 phases, with the ultimately the Fraser Highway connection to Langley completed in the out years of the 10-year plan. In November of 2016, the Mayor's Council and then the board directed us at TransLink to begin all of the planning to bring to procurement readiness the plan for the so-called Surrey-Newton-Guildford line, the 10.5 kilometers connecting Newton-Guildford to Surrey Central. We have done that, and we issued a request for qualifications a few months ago. However, we are certainly mindful of the election, and we are mindful that the City of Surrey Council has requested to the Mayor's Council and the board that we change the plan and shift immediately to Skytrain along Fraser Highway. Our report that Jeff will go through in a moment provides background on how we got to this point ultimately, and the years, in fact, prior to this point for this particular plan, as well as the work we've, in fact, done on Fraser Highway with both light rail and Skytrain. But it also, so we want to bring you up to speed, but it recognizes Surrey's request. And what we are proposing for conversation here today is that with the reality of the City Council action and the election, that we indefinitely suspend the current project. We at staff, through a discussion with our board last week, have already put pens down, if you will. We have stopped any work on the project, awaiting further direction from our policymakers, as is our board of directors. And we've offered some strategies that Jeff will go through that's in the written report. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at several approaches that the Mayor's Council and the board could take to move us forward, really hopefully within the context of the existing Mayor's plan. We here at TransLink are very much committed to making sure that additional high-capacity transit comes to Surrey and to Langley. That will be our commitment. We look forward to the conversation this morning, and we want to assure the public that one way or the other we will bring that planning and that delivery the same amount of rigor that we have done henceforth with all of the rail planning that has been accomplished to date. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff to walk you through the report and the staff recommendation.
Thank you, Kevin. So setting the context, I know it was a very dense report for the first session of the Mayor's Council, so what I'm going to try and do is go through this sort of flow of how we got to where we are, and it gives a context of both how much money is available, the funding that's been approved and allocated, as well as some of the sense of readiness and the steps that would be required if we are to change directions, what it would take to create new business cases, to get a new investment plan, the engagement, et cetera, for that. So the genesis for this actual project, the 27 kilometers, comes back from the Surrey Rapid Transit study that was run at the same time that we did UBC study as well. So it went from 2009 to 2012. This has been identified as a regional priority at least since 1993 in the long-range strategy then that said high-capacity transit for Surrey was a priority by 2021. So we are on the actual overall schedule for that. When we started this, we looked at literally over 1,000 different combinations of technology and alignment and extent within south of the Fraser to be able to understand what the best options were. 13 alternatives sort of came forward that we worked very extensively with the public on and did a multiple account evaluation on. Then those were winnowed down to 4 alternatives that we thought showed promise. And when I say we, that was TransLink was requested to do this in partnership with the provincial government through the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. Langley City and the City of Surrey were partners on that, as was Metro Vancouver. So there was significant public engagement at that point up through till 2012. We published that work in 2013, and when we were developing the mayor's vision in early 2014, along with all the other investments that we were looking at, the mayor's council drew from that alternatives analysis those 4 shortlisted items to be able to come forward with what the rapid transit network should look like for south of Fraser, including the staging of that. There was not, because of the time constraints of putting together that vision in the first half of 2014, there was not significant community engagement on those alternatives beyond that. There has been since that point, since we got the direction. As I mentioned, there were 4 shortlisted alternatives that were looked at. And just to be clear, when we say rapid transit, these include different technologies, Skytrain that we're using extensively through the region, light rail transit, which is at surface, and bus rapid transit. All of them have the characteristic of being high capacity and in their own dedicated right-of-way, which gives them both the ability to run faster as well as put longer vehicles in at more frequent intervals to that. So these were the 4 that were included. It's important to note for the Fraser Highway section, amongst the alternatives, all 3 technologies were advanced in those 4 different alternatives, Skytrain, LRT, and bus rapid transit. For the Surrey, Newton, Guildford, and actually, as you see here, all the way down to White Rock, which was the extent of the analysis, it was bus rapid transit or LRT were amongst those shortlisted alternatives. Skytrain was not seen at that time as a potential candidate because of the cost and capacity, that the capacity was not required or necessarily fitting for that actual corridor. So we did the multiple accounts evaluation, and as Kevin noted earlier, our job is not to set the policy, that's to you and the board. We do the analysis, the evidence, the modeling, the inputs from the community on that, and then you look at the trade-offs to that. And the previous Mayor's Council chose to do LRT based primarily on that trade-off of transportation speed, cost, and community and economic development. So the plan put forward was 2 stages. I think it was Director Harris noted this. 2 stages, the first being the Surrey, Newton, Guildford. The rationale for that staging was that we already had the 96 B line, had recently launched on that, which is the B line services are generally used as a precursor for rapid transit, if there is to be some, as well as the City of the Surrey at that time had been focusing a lot of the development planning around Newton and Guildford. So there was a request by the City of Surrey to look at that line first, and then we would go forward with the Fraser Highway piece. So that's how it was constructed. We anticipated that if funding was available, they would basically go in quick sequence, that soon as we finish Surrey, Newton, Guildford, that we would be on to construction for the Fraser Highway portion of that, the 16.5 kilometers connecting Surrey Central to Langley City. So to date, through the Phase 2 investment plan, there's been $1.65 billion in capital funding secured for the project and approved by all levels of government, roughly 40% from the federal government, 40% from the province, and the remainder to the region. It's a little bit higher than 20% for the region because the federal government does not include property costs as part of their calculation for any capital. So the region has a higher share than the notable 20%. So as Kevin noted, we've done a whole number of work items to be on track to go to procurement, which we started. This is germane because, as I mentioned earlier, if we are to change projects at this point in priorities, a lot of these steps have not necessarily been completed yet for new projects, so we'd have to go through that. It also indicates how much money is still available out of that 1.65 billion because we've undertaken these projects to be ready for the actual construction and the operation of LRT on Surrey, Newton, Guildford. So notable amongst those, obviously the business casing and pre-procurement work, the pre-construction work for the actual LRT line included the Bear Creek Bridge project and utilities relocation on 104th and 105th Avenue. The next line item is a partnership agreement. That is something that the Mayor's Council identified in the 10-year vision that we now develop for all major projects. We're actually going forward with that for B lines as well. And that's really to state what the commitments are from a planning perspective and from a contribution perspective from the different cities and TransLink to the project to make it a success. The first ones of those were executed as part of the Mayor's vision in June of this year and denote all of those contribution levels in the work that Surrey's been doing to make that a success. We would see replicating that going forward if we're to change projects. Now, the bottom line of this slide that is also included in the report is we've got some initial accounting of this on how much we spent both on the planning and preparation for procurement, as well as what those construction projects are. It's called expenditures. It's both to date as well as commitments. There are some items in the top 4 rows, the last of those around getting ready and managing the actual procurement process, where we have a budget. We're doing some analysis now, if given that we're stopping right now, exactly how much of that 7.5 million will be expended to get to the final figures. Similarly, of the $29 million of actual construction work that was funded in combination with senior governments for the public transportation infrastructure funding, we've completed that first line item of 16.4 million. We've completed the design on Guildford Exchange, which has multiple benefits. It's required if we were to pursue the LRT project, but would have benefits beyond that. It's in the tender stage. All of that money has not yet been spent. So we'll come back with a detailed accounting on this. There is another aspect to this on some of these projects, or several. The federal government and provincial government may require some reimbursement for some of the projects. We're working through with them at this point. Similarly, these are part of that $1.65 billion capital cost. If that project disappears, we may have to write off some of those TransLink expenditures as opposed to capitalizing them. That will have a financial impact to TransLink's bottom line over the next couple of years. So we'll have to come back with more information on that for you to digest. So as far as the existing approvals and allocations, I mentioned then there was $1.65 billion in the actual, by the end of the phase 2 plan. Remaining then is about $1.58 billion of that envelope that was approved. There are also annual operating expenditures included in the new revenue sources in the plan, anticipating the operation of LRT or any new rapid transit coming on in 2024. The phase 2 plan also included $30 million to get to procurement readiness for that Fraser Highway 16.5 kilometers starting later, actually in 2019. We are going to get going on that work. In the future phase 3 plan, which had been notionally anticipated to come forward in 2020, there was $1.9 billion allocated in that plan for the Fraser Highway LRT. That was, I'll get into this, but that was based on 2017 studies that we did. There are some remaining federal funds from the 10-year allocation to TransLink of $2.6 billion overall. There's about $185 million of that that has not been allocated yet through the Phase 2 plan. So that's our starting point. There is a 40% commitment from the provincial government to all the capital that's in the 10-year vision, though they have not budgeted for Phase 3 or beyond at this point. So within the existing approved and planned for envelope, that adds up to about $3.5 billion remaining for the 27 kilometers of LRT that could be considered, if there's direction to change strategy, that's at least the existing envelope by which we would start from. As for where are we on the status of planning for the Surrey to Langley line, we've actually done a fair bit of detailed technical work on this. This was at the request of the provincial government, the previous provincial government, in preparation for business case and funding decisions that would come forward. Their business casing process always requires that we have a detailed alternative considered, as well as the preferred option from the region on that. But they had specific interest in understanding what the cost for a Skytrain would be along that, so to bring it up to the same level of costing that we had done for an LRT. So that was an internally based process. We haven't done any public consultation on that, but we have a fairly detailed design for that. You can see the actual differences in capital costs associated with that, based on our estimates of how much would be elevated, some of the design considerations, standard construction. Those are things that we'll have to test going forward if there's new direction. So that is the reference case that we have right now. Just short of $1 billion difference, $965 million capital difference. You see at the bottom the trade-offs that TransLink management identified to the board and the Mayor's Council at that time, and the Mayor's Council continued to go forward with the preference of LRT for that corridor, to use that as the basis of the project development. Obviously, Skytrain has quicker travel times, not intersecting in any mixed traffic along the corridor. That results in more trips in general, but also more trips, longer trips into the Burrard Peninsula, versus more of an internal capture to south of Fraser for the LRT that happened, and at a lower cost. It was a discussion. Cost is obviously an important principle on this, and what would the available funding may be from the province and the federal government. There was a sense that the LRT project was both appropriate and would move faster as far as the overall 27 kilometers. So that's where we stand today on that project. Moving into sort of next steps, I won't go into this in detail. We are suggesting at this point that we cannot advance a project, an LRT project, unless we have an active and willing partner and champion in the city of Surrey for LRT. So we have suspended all expenditures and efforts and resources on that, which also then, not just amongst staff, enables the proponents that have been preparing bids to put pens down on that as well. We can come forward in the future if there is a requirement or a request to mobilize either all or a portion of that project, what we might do and what the costs associated with that would be. So as far as options for next steps, you can see from the little thumbnails, what really differentiates these are what's kind of the geographical scope of what we're looking at. So option one that would be sort of similar, would be the most streamlined, is just basically moving all of our resources to a new project, a Skytrain project of Surrey towards Langley, and basically deferring any other planning in regards to what do we do on the overall 27 kilometers until a later time. And we focused for all of these options, we're assuming that the $3.5 billion envelope is kind of used as the starting point, as well as the 27 kilometer commitment to rapid transit. The second option is very similar to the first, but says that we should advance the planning on what we're going to actually do for the whole 27 kilometers, concurrent to actually shifting our efforts and resources and detailed planning for the SkyTrain. There's a number of reasons for that. I'll go into that in the next slide, and they're included in the report. So that we would be out there in the public talking about what we're actually going to do on the full 27 kilometers, and then within that we're diving deep on what the details would be for a Surrey Central towards Langley project. The third would be you do the first two things, but you nest that within the discussion of what the overall regional transportation priorities are, because there are going to be interconnected projects coming forward. These have already been identified by previous Mayors Council and many people that we need to actually consider connections to the North Shore, connections out to Fraser Valley and beyond, to Delta and to South Surrey. So then you start looking at those that are already planned to happen in 2019, do this work that we're talking about here, and then come forward with an overall vision and see where the priorities for timing and sequencing go. Just before I get into the pros and cons, we're recommending that we would take your input today and come back with a detailed work plan. There are a number of things that we have to be able to answer for the different levels of government. First of all is our own. If we are to approve a new project, any project over $50 million needs to be identified in an investment plan and fully funded. The investment plans need to be consulted with the public, so we would go out and tell them both how we're going to pay for it, even if we were using the existing funding envelope, what those projects are, what the implications are on the transportation system. Senior government business cases are required. We can't just shift the dollars from this one to a new one. We have to go through a detailed process that's prescribed by Treasury Board. We have a lot of the basis to start that if we were to look at a new project, but we have to go through that process. That takes some time. There's steps around environmental assessments, which I think came up earlier, about public engagement, about detailed alternatives, etc., procurement models, those kinds of things. When we're doing a major project, we do want to go out and make sure that we're consulting, that people understand both the alignment, the design, the implications, the impacts to their neighborhood, etc. Those are things that we would suggest would be relevant to our actual work plan for any of the options that we're looking at. So I'm not going to read all these out, but these are some of the questions that we would need to look at in order to be able to both approve a new project and investment plan, so do the business casing for you and for the board, and to be able to financially understand what the implications are, as well as to be able to prepare those senior government business cases that will be required by Treasury boards. Some of them we have a fairly detailed reference case right now, but we have not talked to the public along that Fraser Highway corridor since 2011. We heard from some constituents this morning. We would have to go forward and show them what the reference case is, look at variations on that, see what kinds of construction methodologies might be looked at, things like that. There may be different corridor alignments, different ways of putting these together, different operating plans, all of which may actually impact the reference case and force us to do a new design, which could come up with a different cost profile as well. The final thing that you note is that these rapid transit lines are not done in isolation. They're done in part of a network. We've identified a number of new B lines for south of the Fraser, so understanding what the impacts of those are. Right now, we're slated to launch a new Fraser Highway B line in fall of 2019. So does this have an impact on that? Does it have an impact on the existing 96 B line? So this is specific to a SkyTrain project along Fraser Highway. Now, if we are to do a refresh of the 27 kilometers overall strategy, there are a number of things we'd also have to look more broadly to understand what the options may be. Some of those may actually impact what the SkyTrain project on Fraser Highway would look like. The second bullet there, do any of the options for Surrey, Newton, Guildford in the future include a SkyTrain connection either on one or a part of the corridor or on both corridors? That would impact, obviously, the overall cost, but it would impact how you would design the initial project. You don't want to foreclose options when you do a SkyTrain project from Surrey to Langley. So the design would be impacted accordingly. We also need to know the timeline and the funding implications to be able to work with senior governments on that. These are the pros and cons, obviously, on option one. It's the most streamlined option, so it would require the least amount of reallocation of resources, maybe marginally quicker than option two to do so. As I just pointed out, there's some concern about future-proofing if we just go forward with that. From our perspective, there's also concern about being clear with the communities along the Surrey, Newton, Guildford corridors about what is actually going to happen there as part of good due process. Option two has the benefit of really holding the 10-year vision intact and starting with that and allows us to kind of understand what the overall envelope of funding that's currently approved, how that should be allocated towards a new SkyTrain project, if that's the will of this body and goes forward and has funding support, how much of that we can actually build and what the design of that would be. It does require a lot of resources. I mentioned that we are planning on doing the update to the regional transportation strategy. That would be overlapping with this, so there's the bandwidth amongst this body and the board and the same number of people to be able to do these things, some of the new investment plans, et cetera. Option three really opens up a risk of basically unsettling the consensus of the 10-year vision that's been hard fought and agreed upon around this table and actually all levels of government by calling into question both what the extent of rapid transit would be south of the Fraser, as well as the timing and the amount of funding that's required. As a result, you'll see within there that we're proposing that option two or something along that vein be the basis for developing a more detailed work plan to bring back to you at a future meeting, and that's the basis of the recommendation at this time. Those are the proposed recommendations that are included in the report. As Kevin outlined at the beginning of this, these are from management's perspective. This option B is an approach we can take. We're certainly open if there are variations on that. This does not cast us in concrete on what the path is, but there's a lot of additional analysis to be done to bring forward. So I'll leave it there. Chair.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the report. Before we dive into any motion or the recommendation, I do want to open it up to members around this table to ask questions or make some comments to start if there's. Mayor Froese.
Well, thank you very much. And before I start, I just want to thank the Mayor's Council for the endorsement of Mayor Cote and myself to be chair and vice chair of this board. And as we heard earlier, not a vast majority didn't run. So I'm not sure if I've heard congratulations. I've already heard condolences for this position, but I certainly
we'll probably find out in the next 10 minutes.
That's right. I'm certainly going to strive to work for the betterment of our regional transportation system. So I thank you. So a couple of questions, and I just want a real easy one. Just going to the proposed resolution, it says endorse TransLink decision. Is that TransLink board? Have they met and made a decision, or is this staff?
We met in your package, actually, is a resolution from our board. We met last week, a couple of days after the City of Surrey council action. One of the things that the board wanted to make clear is that we should move to suspend the project, given, as Jeff points out, we cannot work in the City of Surrey without a willing partner at that point in time. So the board endorsed that approach and is seeking the guidance today of the Mayor's Council, and then based on today's actions, then we and the board will then take the necessary steps.
Good. Thank you. So when we get to the motion, I'll just add that clarity, just to make sure it's TransLink board's decision. The other is you talked a little bit about the costs that have already been incurred in the Surrey Newton Guildford line and the development up to this stage, and it seems to me from that chart it's potentially $50 to $70 million, but you're going to be doing some more work on determining exactly how much has been expended and how much is there. It would be interesting to know, and maybe you'll need some direction from this board to initiate some discussions with the City of Surrey on what portion of that is recoverable. And perhaps it's recoverable, if nothing goes ahead on the Surrey-Newton-Guilford line, is recoverable by the City of Surrey for works that they need. And so that's a possibility. And really, what part of that is money that we can never recover, whether it's the City of Surrey or TransLink. And you also mentioned that there may be a cost for senior other levels of government wanting repayment or reimbursement of some of those costs. So I think it's important that this body knows how much that is. And these are tax dollars, that regional tax dollars that we've worked very hard to obtain to get this funding. And I don't think our taxpayers want to see money go to waste. However, I do recognize that the City of Surrey has asked for a change order, I suppose, and that there's a cost to a change order, and who's going to bear that cost. So I would like to see some sort of initiated discussion with the City of Surrey about that once you have more details. Is that something that's being planned in this motion, or would you need further direction?
Well, as Jeff pointed out, Mayor Froese, the accounting that we've provided today is an accounting. So you ask all very good questions, and those questions we have to run down. We have to work with this body, with our board, and those conversations can happen with the City of Surrey as well. But at the end of the day, we have to bring it back here into the TransLink Board of the Directors to try to sort out what the implications are, what we can continue to assume are beneficial projects, and what elements of the expenses to date need to be written off.
Okay, thank you. And just the final point is the Surrey-Newton-Guilford line. We'll be looking at. We have I should start this. We have a responsibility to the riders and the people of Surrey when this board and the Mayor's Council and the TransLink Board have basically approved a project that's going to really enhance the transportation choices that they have. So are we looking at this point? I see you used the word suspend, so that's good. But to recognize the needs of those people and businesses in Surrey. So are we looking at, as part of this review, what could be done in its place? Are we suspending light rail or rail of some sort? Are we looking at bus rapid transit or express buses? What's going to take its place?
Mayor Froese, that's what's intended as part of option B, would be to do a refresh of the 27-kilometer rapid transit strategy, to go out and look at what options remain for those different corridors. We have done some bus rapid transit work as one alternative. That had to be done as part of the alternatives to the actual LRT that we put forward for the business casing. So we can use that as a basis. We'll actually have to have discussions with you and with the community. Is Skytrain an option? Is some portion of LRT or Best Bus an option?
I think another way to say that, the second option, which is the staff recommendation, continues to be able to project to the people of Surrey and, of course, to Langley, that we have an integrated approach within the context of 27 kilometers of rapid transit. That's what we've been projecting through the various phases of the current approach. Option 2 would allow us to continue that conversation in that portion of our service area.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Brody.
I'm interested. I'm interested to know, given that we've been at this for 6 to 8 years in making this plan, and we're $50 million plus into the planning and design of the Surrey-Newton-Guilford line. Given the fact we had unanimous support from the board, from the Mayor's Council, from staff, and it was fully consulted with the public, I'm interested to know how, like in number 3, start immediately with the planning, consultation, design, and procurement readiness work for Skytrain. I mean, is staff really recommending that because of an election, after all that we've gone through, that we will then make this switch?
Mayor Brody, I think what we've tried to put forward today in the 3 options that Jeff outlined are three approaches that do take into consideration the reality of the election in the city of Surrey, and particularly the city Surrey Council action. So clearly it is the pleasure of this body to debate that today. How fast we move into a next phase, if we're going to shift gears from the light rail, the Surrey Newton Guildford line, to Skytrain on Fraser Highway, that's what we want to discuss with this body. Our recommendation is based on today's feedback and direction, then come back at the next meeting with a much more fleshed out, if you will, action plan going forward based on today's conversation.
Well, your wording then may be at fault. Start immediately with planning, consultation, design, and procurement readiness. So what I hear you say is more analysis. Am I correct in saying that?
Well, I think, I think it's maybe splitting hairs to a certain degree. We have to get direction from this body and eventually direction from the board of directors. I think what we want to reflect and project to the public and to this body is once this body has made a decision, we would move as quickly as we are able to shift gears and start planning for a different technology on Fraser Highway. So the start immediately would be based on whether you take action today, December 13th, or in a subsequent meeting. That's what we meant by start immediately.
I have to say that I think this approach is setting a very, very dangerous precedent. I can tell you that if our city council in Richmond, if our wishes were adhered to, we would have a ground level system for the Canada line. It didn't work out, and this was the only option we ended up having, and we made it work. But the fact was that our city council wanted something at ground level, and TransLink didn't come back and just flip the switch and say, okay, we'll go with the planning, consultation, design, and procurement for a ground level system. Didn't happen. Now, it seems to me that there are a lot of aspects that we need to review. And Mr. Chair, when the time comes, I would like to make an alternative motion to what we see here. First of all, has TransLink, various commitments were made by Surrey. They've entered into an agreement, and that agreement comes with changes to the OCP in Surrey. It comes with land dedication, various other financial commitments. Have you talked about what would be required on this new section or the commitments that TransLink has already expended for the old section of the SNG line? Have you considered that?
I think that is, we can go into more detail, but those are the types of questions that we would need to bring back here. No, we haven't gone through that in a lot of detail. I think as Jeff laid out that sort of list of questions, there is a whole host of things that would have to be attended to move into a different direction.
I mean, surely we're going to have the same analysis, the same level of depth of analysis to change this decision to Skytrain as we had to make it the LRT for Surrey Newton Guildford, aren't we?
Absolutely.
Well then, so I keep coming back. You're not to go into planning, consultation, design, and procurement readiness. What you're to do, what you're saying is that you want to have more analysis. So I think, without belaboring every point, but I will make this in the form of a motion in due course. First of all, I think there has to be talk about the commitments that have already been made and what the treatment of the commitments is going to be. I think we need to have a complete business plan for what is proposed and talking about the funding implications, because we cannot assume that while I understand various levels of government have said, okay, you can take that envelope and push it over to a different line in Surrey, and frankly, I don't challenge that. That's okay with me. But the fact is, we don't have enough money in this phase. And how are we going to do it? Are we going to phase the project? Just exactly what are we going to do? We need to know about the additional costs that it's going to take for the new approach. We need to know the timing for the delivery of the SkyTrain line and the potential effects as the result of the delay. We need to know what is the upcoming plan for the SNG. Are we just leaving it there? I mean, what are we doing? Are we going to serve it with B lines? What about the land use and the settlement patterns from the proposed changes and the effect on the regional growth strategy? What's the consultation plan here? Because we have to have, we were told a robust consultation plan, though there are differing opinions. It was all fully consulted, and now certainly staff and others seem to be willing to just throw that away. And then, of course, there are the questions that are on page 31 and 32 of the report, which you've outlined on the slides, and some of what I've said is redundant to that. We also have to have a very clear indication that this discussion is not to affect any of the other components, like the Broadway subway is to go ahead. We're not waiting for this analysis. So what it comes down to, in my opinion, is what we've heard this morning. There were two different positions were presented to us through the delegates. We had one that said, stay with the plan because you've got a plan and we need it. And the other one said, change the plan. And I thought they were very well presented, both sides of the argument, and we're not in a position to make that kind of determination, other than to say we have made that determination. So if we are going to change it with significant financial implications, we've got to know what it is that's proposed, where we're going, and whether that is the right way to do it. So it comes back to the suspension of the SNG, which I would support, given all the uncertainty. But we have to have a lot more analysis, in my opinion. And so when the time comes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a revised motion.
Okay, well, I do want to have discussion around the table before we get to that point. Mayor McCallum.
Thank you very much, and congratulations to all of you getting elected recently. I, in the city of Surrey, was my sixth campaign, and it was the hardest. It was the one that was most intense, and it was the one we did the most public consulting in my 6 times of running. And the main issue was SkyTrain, main issue in the city of Surrey. We did extensive consulting. I look as myself as not a person saying, I do this, I believe in this, or I do this. I believe in being a messenger from our city. That's the way I look at politics, and we go out to our community, we understand what they have in problems, then we ask our community how they feel we should solve them, and then we put together a campaign saying this is what our community wants. And then we campaign out in our community on that basis. It was a clear choice in Surrey that, as has been mentioned here before, the current or the past council was very supportive unanimously in light rail. And we were the opposite. We believed unanimously in SkyTrain. We did do the public consulting over 3 months, extensive. I worked 12, 15 hours a day out campaigning 7 days a week. I did over 10 speeches every single day, often at midnight and 1 a.m. And during those time and 30 days, I did not, in our community, see one single person that was for light rail. That was all for SkyTrain. There is no support in the city of Surrey for for light rail. The only people that we do run into that support light rail is some of the business community, and you heard 2 of them today. But as far as our citizens are concerned, they were unanimous. Over 80% of all the polling we did even some of the media polling that was done, even our opposition polling showed the support in the city of Surrey was over 80% for Skytrain. That type of support in my years in political life, I have never seen for any project. I don't think that kind of support's ever been seen in province of British Columbia for a major infrastructure project. So it's very, very important to the citizens of Surrey that when they voted for us, they literally did not vote for the past council. Every one of them got defeated. Every one of our particular team, except for one, got elected into council by overwhelming numbers. And so I can say confidently today that there's been a lot of talk about consulting, public consulting. We just ran a huge election with extensive public consulting, and overwhelmingly, the people of Surrey want Skytrain. And I want to say just a couple of other things, and then, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure how you want us to go as far as the motions, whether you want to do it 1, 2, 3, all separate motions or together.
I think once we get through the discussion, we'll have a better sense of where potential points of conflict might be, and I think those would be the opportunities where we would separate. But
Okay, I'll just be brief in my opening comments. Having been on this very distinguished board for 10 years in the past and have chaired it for 4 or 5 years, especially in building large major infrastructure projects like the Canada Line and the Evergreen Line, very involved in buying Vancouver's buses, the trolley buses that, by the way, was the world's largest order of trolley buses. It was so large that there was no manufacturers in the world that could produce it, and we had to do a lot of work to eventually get it. But certainly with all of those years, the city of Surrey has always been wanting to be a partner with the region in transportation. Myself, I'm a very strong supporter of the transit board. I continue to believe very strongly that all of you need to really work for your individual communities that you represent and put that into the prospect of having a great metro area. The city of Surrey, and especially myself, support very much the 10-year plan that was put together over the last number of years in very difficult terms. And I understand some of those terms because I was on a board when we were moving ahead. I think we're in a golden opportunity right now, a golden opportunity in this region to move ahead and get building some of the projects in each of our cities that we need to get built. There's been some comments already in the fact that we need to do more studies and we need to do more things. My sense out in the community, and this is in the whole region, my sense is that the public generally wants us to get going and start building the infrastructure that this region needs in each of our cities. And I'm not talking just about Surrey now. I think we need to get going and get shovels in the ground. We have a golden opportunity to do that now. And we cannot wait any longer to get doing that. Because as has mentioned earlier, politically, we're in just the right spot right now to get the money and to get building these projects. If we delay even one day in some cases, it's not only going to cost a lot more money, but it's going to, that money is going to disappear because of the short window we have an opportunity for now with a federal election next year and with a provincial election probably at least in 1 or 2 years. We have a golden opportunity now to move forward and start building in this region. And I think because of the planning that has been done and the 10-year plan, which I fully support, and I think it's a good plan, we need to move forward. And how we have moved with major infrastructure projects in the past in this region is that we do a 10-year overall plan, and then we listen to each of the cities of what they need to do, small and large, and we go ahead and get it done. Let me give you one just quick example on the North Shore cities. This region in their planning has always said, we have an order in which we do rapid transit lines. We also have an order in which we provide to the smaller cities their transportation they need. And so when we went ahead, for instance, with the Canada line, we said to the North Shore that we needed to go ahead with them to get a new C-bus, just as an example. We also said when we did Canada line to the Tri-City mayors that once we built this Canada line, the next project that we would build would be the Evergreen line. And the boards in those regions always did agree with that plan for the last 20 years. It started with the Expo line, it went to the Millennium line, it went to the Canada line, it went to the Evergreen line, and then it went to Fraser Highway and Skytrain to Langley, Surrey's turn. When it came to Surrey, TransLink said no. We're not going to do Skytrain. Surrey waited for 30 years. They voted for all of the rest of your plans in this region. And yet, when it came to Surrey's time, the answer was no. And as you heard, there wasn't the public consulting done. This was all decided by the past council. That's why they got defeated. They didn't listen to the public. And I will also say TransLink did not listen to the public. Because I've been out in the public. That's how I campaign. I never heard anywhere in the public that TransLink did extensive public consulting. Outside of the fact when they call public consulting, going out and saying, here's light rail and all the pretty pictures of light rail and here's what we're proposing. That's not public consulting. I got involved in TransLink and public consulting on the Canada line where I went around to all the communities in this region when I was chair. And I listened to the people in all of your cities. And I understood what each of your residents wanted when we did the Canada line. That's why we said we were going to do the Evergreen line, because I listened to the Tri-City communities. I was in those meetings myself. They did not do any consulting in Surrey, TransLink. And so when we went out there in this last election, the public in overwhelming numbers said, we don't want light rail. We have never wanted light rail. We want Skytrain the same as the rest of the region has. That's what our people, we want to be part of the region. I can't believe some of the comments that we have heard out there. Light rail would break Surrey away from the region. Completely away. There'll be no connection to the rest of the region. That's not what Surrey people want. They want to be part of the region. And it was our turn to get rapid transit. And TransLink said no. So all I'm saying to all of you right now, that we have done a lot of work in the city of Surrey. I support all three of these motions. I support them fully. Our council supports them fully. And one thing I would like to add, and I have said this many, many times, this region is ready to move ahead. We do not want any delaying tactics that are being put out by previous speakers. We need to move forward quickly. I think, and I have traveled extensively, I'll be very brief here, I have traveled extensively around the world to large cities around the world, cities the size of our metro area. Everywhere I've gone, the construction has started quickly. They build around the clock, 7 days a week. The rest of the world's moving very fast in construction projects. And I think this region needs to recognize it and look at that. If you take Fraser Highway and Skytrain, and if we're building that 7 days a week, around the clock, we probably can save, and this is TransLink's figures, probably save $200 to $300 million off the coast. Just that one process of building it quicker. So there is a lot of areas I think we need to be proactive, look forward, and I certainly, from the City of Surrey's point of view, fully support this board. I fully support TransLink, and I fully support the region, and I'm very, very passionate that we have a golden opportunity in this region to work together, and that means that we need to support some of the smaller cities' requests, but in total, we need to move forward on our 10-year plan quickly. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for letting me speak probably a little longer than the few opening comments.
Our procedures bylaw does give 5 minutes, but I think given your particular interest in your community, happy to give some more time. But we are getting later in the meeting, so I do hope that the rest of the members speaking can get clarity into the point. The next speaker is Director Harris.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. I just want to be clear. I was under the impression that you were asking whether we had any questions of staff before we debated any possible motion. Where are
So
we?
there's no motion on the table, and I'm not entertaining them yet, but the focus is on questions, but I am allowing comments to be made as well, too.
All right. May I start with a few questions and then make a comment?
Yes.
Some of them are very straightforward. My first question to the staff is, when the province approved the business case that we have in front of us for the Surrey Newton Guildford Light Rail, and it went through Treasury Board, did they at that time also consider it in conjunction with Skytrain and LRT options for the Langley portion for the third piece? Or was that not part of their consideration?
It was understood that that would be a different phase and then a different business case would come forward other than the request by the previous government actually to do a side-by-side analysis of Skytrain versus light rail. Hence, that's why we have work already done for both light rail and Skytrain. It's early in that phase, but it got us a planning level on cost estimates. We would still have to do a business case back to the federal government and the provincial government in accordance with their rules.
Okay, thanks. That helps. Second question was, when you're talking about refreshing the Surrey Newton Guildford case, presume with other alternatives, I think, Jeff, you might have said that we're going to look at what we do if not LRT. I'm presuming that all through that analysis, what you're proposing here is to compare it to the LRT alternative that was approved by the previous Mayor's Council.
I think we'll come forward with some options on what that analysis might look like, but yes, we would probably go back to here are the different alternatives that you could do, including all the technologies.
Yeah, I would strongly suggest that that be done, because you may think that something's great, but we need to know how it compares to what's being done. And the third is just a small question, and I can make some comments. When you have a section in your report, page 33, on cancelling versus suspending, I'm just wondering if there's a typo where you said if the suspension period is for longer than 4 to 6 months, then the option differs from cancelling. I think you might have meant shorter than 4 to 6 months.
You got me again.
Sorry, had to close with that one. But just now, if I may, those are my questions. But in terms of comments, I can't help but comment that the quickest way forward is not to throw a bomb into a hard-fought victory. That bomb has been cast. Clearly, we cannot simply go forward with LRT because there's no way. It puts me back into the 70s when people said no highway through Vancouver. That also stopped. So LRT has to stop for now because we can't, there's no question in my mind about a host city. However, what happens instead, we cannot be thinking in this council with the oaths that we've just taken with a regional interest, throwing away analysis of 4 years. I have no doubt, I understand that everybody bought into the vision that the mayors created. The problem wasn't the vision. The problem wasn't wanting Skytrain instead of LRT. The problem isn't saying that people want an extension to UBC. The problem is funding and taking the best opportunity that's available at the moment when stars happen to align. And I think we know how hard it was to reach what we reached. It may not be perfect. We may end up with something very different from LRT. But we have something. We know that costs increased vastly over the 2 years that we waited. We know we now have a stop button pushed, but that stop button is not a go button. At least I hope for this council going forward that it's very seriously considered. I have some confidence in the many important questions that were raised and that Mayor Brody raised, that many of those will be fairly straightforward to answer because many of those have been considered already. But I think it's a very, very risky precedent to say that on the basis of an election where people cast out their wish lists, we all know that, we've all run for election, without ever having to say, will you write the check for it? Mm-hmm. We know what we're saying here, right? Before, if Surrey came forward and said, without any question, this is so important to us that our people will write a check for $50 million to reimburse TransLink, I don't think that conversation even is going to be that easy. But we are losing time, we're losing money, and I hope that the costs going forward that are considered do take into account the actual costs of the delay that has been precipitated. And the last comment I want to make is on public consultation. Consultation takes many forms. Asking people what they'd love to see on a wish list is one thing. Asking people to pay is another. We saw that in the referendum. The issue is who's going to pay. This was a very, very lucky, fortunate alignment that could have moved our city forward, our region forward. And I do hope that everybody here thinks not just in terms of their cities, but of the region as a whole. This is integrated with an awful lot of work that's gone on at Metro Vancouver in terms of city shaping, city planning. Often these things, the public consultation feeds in, but the decisions are far, far more complex, and they might not appear to be ideal on the surface. That's why we don't typically make complicated decisions in Canada or in British Columbia by referendum. We make them by electing people who we trust to make considered decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Kennedy Stewart.
Just to clarify for Richard.
Well, I've got two stewards on the speaking list for the first time, so I did have to clarify.
Great. Well, thank you. So I'd like to thank the staff for all their work. I mean, I know this is, it's a change period, and I think you're doing an excellent job in putting these forward in a way that we can digest quickly and also the public can understand. So thank you for that. I also like to thank, again, the past Mayor's Council for all their work. Democracy is a marvelous but difficult system of government. I've won 3 close elections and spent 7 years in Parliament, so I've seen the best and the worst, I think. But the premise is that the future governments are guided but not bound by past decisions. And that is a key premise of democracy, is that we've just gone through a democratic exercise, which I consider the top. It's the people speak, they elect folks, we go and do their work if we're lucky enough to be elected, if we have that honor. And so we're guided by, but not bound by the past decisions, and we can change things. So as I'm sitting around this table, as I think about the vote we just had, I like to think about how much we agree with what has come before us. So really, us unanimously adopting the work plan was really important because it really signaled how much we agree with the past work of council. We do have, though, a significant change in Surrey, as Mayor McCallum eloquently has said, and I think that is the highest order we have, is that the people through a democratic process that's the envy of the world have come forward and said, we want this change. So I respect Mayor McCallum's voice here very much. I think that of just getting to know Mayor McLaughlin, and this gentleman knows his community, and so I'm not going to go tell him what needs to happen in Lions Bay. I'm going to listen to what he has to say, and then when he is adamantly for something, then I'll do my best to support that. So I think we should move ahead with this, and I'll be supporting it, these recommendations. I do think that there's a huge part of the plan that we're all moving forward together on, but I do think the people of Surrey have spoken, and that voice is being heard through Mayor McCallum and his council, and so I won't go on longer than that, but I think the democratic principle trumps the past work. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Walker.
Thank you. Whoever brought this to the table, I really appreciate the fact that the first day here and we're straight into the deep end. It's probably how we learn and much more quickly. Our election in White Rock was very, very different than Mayor McCallum's in Surrey. We didn't hear a lot about transit. There were other large issues. But when we did hear about transit, it was around buses. There is really no expectation in my community for either Skytrain or LRT for some years to come, and this may well push it back considerably. But there is a need for transit in our community. Our community is growing leaps and bounds. Mayor McCallum spoke of putting shovels in the ground. There are shovels in the ground all over White Rock and in much of South Surrey. Our area is exploding with individuals moving to it, and we need to find ways of moving them out of it, whether it's going to Surrey or Vancouver or Richmond or wherever. And so something has to be done that's going to see to the needs of all of us. Having said that, Mayor McCallum, your community is our largest neighbor, and we rely on you for so many things. I think we have a wonderful working relationship, and I look forward to that relationship continuing. And so with that in mind, I also, as Mayor Stewart has said, respect what the people of Surrey are saying and what they are looking for. Here is my concern. How much further back will this decision push anything such as rapid transit coming to my community, or indeed, if I may, Mayor McCallum, and I don't mean to speak for your people in South Surrey, to South Surrey in general. We would like to see things as simple as more buses to be able to get us to the interchange in Richmond, or to be able to get us down to the hub in the area of Wally. And so I'm having a difficult time trying to figure it out. I want your ideas to go forward, but I'm very concerned that if it's a 10-year plan, we may not be seeing anything within what we think is a 10-year plan. If 3A is not passed, does that then default us to the fact that we're going to refresh the entire south of the Fraser Transit Plan, and what is that going to look like, and how is it going to impact everybody, my community, and those around? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mayor Richard Seward.
Thank you very much. We'll do the rest of this offline. I actually invite the new mayor of Vancouver to have coffee with me or lunch, and we will work out together which one of us gets to continue to use the title Mayor Stewart, and which one of us will hereinafter be called Mayor Kennedy. So on Netflix, you go home and you can pull up the movie Groundhog Day. And the music keeps starting the same every morning in this world that they live in. And I've been here at the Mayor's Council table for a decade, and because of the way we're structured, because of our governance structure, the music starts the same an awful lot. And we have a governance structure that doesn't allow us to come to
the kind of affirmation that we did this past year very easily. And to come to a plan, the mayor's plan that was fully funded and developed with lots of compromise all across the region was something that so many of us were discouraged about for the years leading up to that, because it was really a hard fought. It was really a series of compromises, a series of just meetings after meeting after meeting, and discouragement and change. I'm going to go back to some of the history that Mayor McCallum mentioned. He didn't mention that after the Expo line was completed, the next community to get Skytrain was supposed to be Coquitlam. The minister of the day was Rita Johnson in Surrey, so Surrey got Skytrain. The next one was going to be Coquitlam, of course, but then we ran the Millennium Line back to Vancouver, and then the next one would be Coquitlam, but Richmond got the line. And at that point, we were the mayor's council, or the Skytrain board, or the TransLink board, as it was then, put out that we were pretty much planning light rail to Coquitlam, and we were happy with that. I remember my first years on council, we did a lot of work that was designing those light rail stations and the various light rail workings of the Evergreen line, which was going to be light rail from LRT from Lougheed Mall into Coquitlam through Port Moody at grade, and that was Port Moody's request as well. And we did all the work related to light rail, and we were looking forward to, it's a different type of development that surrounds light rail than surrounds the Skytrain, certainly, and we were doing our plans based on that. And it was Minister Falcon that came to Coquitlam at one point and decided for us that it was going to be Skytrain. That immediately changed a lot of things. At that point, the province was taking on the project as well, so it wasn't so much that we could argue. It was simply going to get built, and assuming we could come up with the dollars and with our 1/3, and that was another series of groundhog moments trying to come up with the dollars for the regional funding of that. Our challenge today is, how do we move forward? And so I absolutely want to defer on the kinds of decisions that local communities have to make. I wish they weren't going in that direction. I wish they had the kind of faith in LRT that Coquitlam had well, in fact, Mayor McCallum was on the TransLink board at the time, or the group that LRT was presented to Coquitlam. That said, I agree with Mayor Kennedy. And at the end of this meeting, someone's going to mention that Mayor Stewart was the wisest voice at the table. One of us. That we have to defer to some degree. That said, we can't jump in without study, and I think, and this isn't to stall, there's so much complexity that goes with the choice of technology. The province studied it intensely before announcing that they were switching technologies on us, and I think we're at that point now where we clearly have to examine this new reality, and I'm supportive of Surrey's ambitions, Surrey's intent to move to an elevated line. Now we've got an awful lot of work to do in order to make sure that the mayor's plan, which is absolutely vitally important, that it keeps going and that it doesn't stall because of the results of an election. And I think that would be the worst thing possible. We've got an amazing plan that I don't get everything I want, and nobody at the table got everything they wanted, but it's nonetheless an amazing plan that benefits our residents, our children, and our grandchildren for generations to come. We've got to keep going forward with it to the extent we possibly can.
Thank you, Mayor Harvey.
Well, thank you, and support the voice of Mr. Mayor McCallum and his desire after the election, and also the recommendations before us today. I would like to have more information provided, please. And Jeff, from my experience on dealing with in a much smaller value in regards to federal grants and funding and provincial grants and funding, business case is a key component. From what I understand is that we just can't rely on verbal assurances from even our Prime Minister or the Premier, but it has to be legally done, documented, and that business case is a vital component. Could you just advise us in your experience, and I recognize your good work on these types of business case developments over many years, how long would that take to get the federal and provincial sign-offs?
So thanks, Mayor Harvey. On the first point, yes, we need the Treasury boards, both of them, to sign off. When I went through the steps of what would be required to fund the project and then go forward, when we bring forward an investment plan, just like we did in June, we have that assurance from both the federal and the provincial governments that the Treasury board have approved that project specifically with all the details, the procurement models, etc. So that is a critical step. We can't just shift, and they've let us know that that will apply to this as well. As far as the timing, I'll dodge a little because it depends on how many changes are required to the reference case that we have today, some of the work that we're going to need to do as far as what the station location, elevations, whatever the path is that you send us on. So there's that design component piece. We can start running the business cases concurrently, but as a reference, when we approved the phase 1 plan back in November of 2016, then we approved the investment plan at the end of June in 2018, and so similar state. So that's sort of a rough point, but we'll come back with detailed plans for you.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Buchanan?
Thank you very much. Well, certainly I want to be respectful to the wishes of Surrey and their electorate and their council that put forth their unanimous motion on their inaugural night. But I also want to be respectful in the fact that I am a new mayor representing my community, as are 16 other mayors sitting around this table. And I don't think I've heard language in the sense that people are trying to stall or slow down. I think what we're trying to do is be very thoughtful and make very informed decisions and look to get the information that staff have put forth in terms of the questions that we need to ask and the answers we need when we're looking at making billions of dollars of investment decisions. That I would like at least a month to get that information before making a decision. Having said that, like Surrey, the North Shore, through our election cycle, and I think Mayor Booth and Mayor Little would say the same, that definitely on the North Shore, transportation was without a doubt the most hotly debated topic throughout our election. And really, Transmit investments really should be focused on solving the regional issues that we're faced with. That's why we're here. And it's really not about, in my mind, about delivering technology preferences. It's about how are we best solving our transportation issues across this region. And with and I take that very seriously. We took that oath today, but I would be amiss if I wouldn't say I am also here looking at what it is we need on the North Shore. And our issues on the North Shore in terms of congestion, partly created by highway and bridge investments far from the North Shore, but they are making our life daily on the North Shore unlivable. And it's impacting not just us, but the region as a whole. We're looking at travel times across the North Shore, across the Second Narrows Bridge, 4 times longer at peak times than at any other time of the day. And sometimes that goes all day long, and particularly if there's any accidents. And I think that we're seeing tremendous growth in employment, and coupled with our housing inaffordability, has led commuters to be living farther away from the North Shore, but having to travel to the North Shore in order to come to their jobs. And that is causing tremendous pressure locally for our business community, not just for our small businesses, but for the industry, the port industry that we have on the North Shore. And we have spent the last, it's probably been 10, 12 months now, as a North Shore planning group with 3 levels of government, including our 2 First Nation communities and TransLink, studying the whole issue of the transportation, why we're having such challenges on the North Shore. We have a plan in place now that we would like to see move forward, and our 3 North Shore municipalities are committed in funding, looking at what we can do locally in order to solve that problem. But we need support at the regional level as well. And I think TransLink and the region have consistently looked to business cases for guidance on transit investments, including service technology. And considering the severe congestion in other parts of the region, and notably on the North Shore, it would be a significant deviation in process to entertain a change in technology that is currently unsupported by a business case for Surrey and Langley. So as much as I can support canceling, the initial phase, because that's what Surrey's council's wishes are, but I think if we're going to be looking at anything further out to Langley and a change in technology, then that business case needs to be presented to us so we can make a much more informed decision on that. $50 million has been spent already in that planning, design, and readiness, and quite frankly, that $50 million or $70 million would have paid for the 3 B-line rapid buses that we need on the North Shore that would significantly reduce the congestion that we're seeing. And so I want to make sure that any decision in changing technology should not reduce the funding capacity of the Phase 1 investment, of the Phase 2 investment plan. So we should redistribute the full $1.65 billion and not just the $1.58. And I haven't, I've thought about this, but the related costs with the association with the change in technology and potential delay, including review of the level of service for the 96B line, might be a cost that Surrey's constituents might have to be borne on themselves, and not draw down on the funding that's in place already for other investments that have been approved by the plan. So going forward, I am definitely a partner in the region. I think we're all a partner in the region, but we need to support the 10-year plan. And I'll speak more specifically when the motion's on the floor. But I'm not sure what Mayor Brody is bringing forward, but depending on what he brings forward, I might also have an amendment to that.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Dingwall.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to say thank you to TransLink for the information both in the briefing package but here today, and also to the Mayor's Council CEO who provided us with some transition briefing. You can imagine just coming to this regional board, let alone tackling the issue that is before us. That's a big, steep learning curve for all of us. I think and I agree with the suspension of the project, that it's logical under the circumstances, and so I think likely that one is more agreeable than some of the other provisions of the motion. The second one I would say is that I too recognize the wishes of Surrey, and they are duly elected, and I think it's important for us to at least recognize that they're coming to this table with the support of their council and looking for something different. And that would be the same whether it's Mayor's Council or Metro Vancouver, that we have to recognize that there may be wishes coming from a city council. For me, though, there are a number of things that I think we need to have further information and further context around an analysis and context dealing with this change request as it's been referred to. I think dollar implications are clearly top of mind for all of us. That includes capital and operating, and ultimately where that's funded from and resourced from. And I think we have citizen fatigue in terms of tax implications in every one of our communities, and I think for us to understand what those are in terms of this change request and where those sources of funds will come from will be really important as we move forward. And again, this I think reflects the interest of Surrey to try and do something different, and we have to figure out what those cost implications are. I too, like what Mayor Brody had indicated. There's a lot of questions that need to be addressed and answered. I think that's important. I don't think we should jump right in and say we're suddenly planning on Skytrain. That may very well come in a month, but I think a month is not a long period of time, which will then help inform all of us at this table in terms of next steps, funding, some of the things that you're going to seek out from both senior levels of government in terms of financial questions you're going to pose will all come back to us in 1 month. And so a month delay, I think, will provide all of us here an awful lot of information that will help us determine next steps, and in particular, if there are increased in capital and operating costs, where those are going to come from. So those are my questions, or my comments, Mr. Chair.
Thanks very much, and Mayor McEwen.
I too respect Surrey's wishes. I just wanted to bring some history to what we've been talking about for the past 4 years, and that is that we developed a plan, a 10-year plan, that was basically the best bang for the buck at the time. We spent, in the end, probably 2 months trying to wrestle to get $15 million more out of our share, and I think that's important. People need to realize that there's going to be a cost sharing to whatever addition to the scope of work that's going to be brought forth. We, as mayors of our particular municipalities, have a limited scope of how we can get that from. The provincial government has sort of put the onus on us that they wanted it to come from property taxes. We were really resilient in that. We put a line in the sand. We did move a little bit on it just to make the deal work. We had to come up with $15 million. But the other thing I wanted to comment as well is we had several months meeting regarding Vancouver's portion. They wanted
what we've referred to as a bit of a premium, and we spent several meetings trying to figure out what that amount should be that they should be compensating for. And I think, Jeff, if you can correct me, it was about 150 million?
About 100.
100 million? Okay. But that was a big thing. You know, I'm sure we could go around this room right now and ask everybody what their wish list is, and we'd all have. I'd love to have Skytrain out to Anmore. You know, but it isn't a reality. You know, we spent hours and hours trying to get, with the money that was allotted, what the best bang for the buck was, and to get the best thing that was going to move people around this region. Like I said, while I respect Surrey's wishes and that, I just don't know where the money is going to come from right now. So that's all I have to say.
Thanks very much. And I think we've had the opportunity to go around the table, and although there has been different perspectives around the table, I do think there's going to be opportunities for us to find some common ground to be able to move forward. You know, as a mayor, served on the past Mayors Council, you know, I consider myself a big champion of the mayor's plan. So have definitely gone through my own process to struggle with the change of direction from the city of Surrey. But I think everyone around this table recognizes that we're not going to be able to move forward with the process as contemplated without the support of the host community. I think these past number of years, we've had the opportunity to secure some significant funding for rapid transit and transit projects all across our region. And I think south of the Fraser River has a really strong case to be made that improvements and investment needs to occur in that part of the region. Although we are talking about a pretty significant change in technology and location in terms of priorities of where the lines do go, I think Surrey does actually have a very strong case that the funding that has been allocated and secured so far should remain south of the Fraser River. Having said that, I do think that there is a bit of process and a bit of analysis that has to go into this work, and I think that comment has come clear to a number of folks around the table. I think anyone that goes along the Fraser Highway corridor will notice immediately that even the land use patterns along that corridor don't necessarily at this time correspond with the type of land use patterns you would expect near rapid transit. So that alone is going to require some work, and I know that had been contemplated, but in a project that was likely going to be 5 to 10 years away, as opposed to the more immediate priority. So, as someone who is regretting forgetting eating breakfast this morning, and again, at the end, we do need to find a process here, and I do want to get a motion on the table to move forward. Based on the discussion that we've had, because I actually think the first two components into the recommendation are not as contentious, and I would actually like to make a decision on those, and then we can move on to the third recommendation, which ultimately there may be some differences of opinions and some potential amendments. But I think the first 2 points are actually the most immediate decisions that we need to make. And if this body will allow, I would suggest that we look to move the first two recommendations and then deal with that first before moving on to the third recommendation. So, Doug McGowan, do you want to? Okay, so the first and second point in the proposed recommendation has been moved. Is there a seconder? Seconded.
Mr. Chair, I would call for recorded weighted vote.
Oh, he's going to go. Okay. Sorry, what was it? A weighted vote? Okay, so a weighted vote has been called, so this particular vote will come down to a weighted vote. Any discussion on the recommendations 1 and 2? Mayor Brody.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to propose an amendment on number 1, leaving the wording intact. Although I think Mayor Frose's point was that the first line should be endorse the TransLink board's decision. So there's that. But also, I suggest that we add, and my motion to amend is to add at the end, and asking staff for a detailed analysis of the commitments made to date for the SNG line and comments regarding options for payment.
Okay, is there a seconder to the amendment? So it's been moved and seconded. Mayor Brody, do you want to motivate?
Well, I think it stands for itself. It's fairly evident. There has been very, very significant investments already made in the plan as has been unanimously agreed by everybody from the Surrey Council to the entire region, to the entire board, to everybody. And now there's changes. So I think we need to know more detail on what the costs have been that have been incurred, because we have a high level discussion, but I think we need more detail. And then we can decide what are the financial implications. I mean, for instance, when we heard from staff, it sounded like these were the projected costs to date, but in fact, some of them have been spent, some of them haven't been spent, some of them, if you change it now, it's going to be wasted, some won't be wasted. So I think that we need all that kind of discussion to move it forward.
Okay, so we do have an amendment on the floor. Are there any speakers to the amendment? If not, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, carried. So now the amendment.
Could I make the amendment?
Mayor McCallum?
Yeah, I asked to have a weighted vote.
So there will be a weighted vote on the motion.
Then you accepted the amendment without a weighted vote.
So there has to be a call for a weighted vote for every vote that comes forward. So a weighted vote would have had to have been called for the amendment as well, which it was not. Having said that, from what I saw around this table, it was unanimously passed. So we're now back to the original motion, which will be a weighted vote with the amendment.
Mr. Chair,
Mayor Stewart.
I did not vote in favor.
And I did not vote against.
Okay, I apologize.
Mr. Chair, I really would like you to consider that the amendment should be a weighted vote also, because my intention was. Oh, sorry. I would like you to consider the amendment a weighted vote, because my intention when you called the first and second that any amendments, and I knew there was some coming, would be also amended votes. So you did not clarify that the amendment was not going to be a weighted vote. So I would ask you to reconsider, and I think in fairness to everybody around the room, you should call for a weighted vote on the amendment.
So I will look to the executive director and do admit that I am new to this role as well too. So but.
I just consulted with the recording secretary. I would say that our rules around calling weighted votes aren't specific to how they're treated around main motions versus amendments to made motions which have already been called as a weighted vote. So I'd say it's the will of the body in terms of how we interpret it, and if there's a motion to reconsider and revote using a weighted vote, that would up to being the will of the body.
Okay, so I am going to accept the motion as being passed there, but I will leave it up to the body if there is a motion to reconsider the amendment based on the comments made, and then now that we're more clear in terms of the process there. So I apologize if it wasn't clear. This is a newer process to myself as well. I think we're getting a signal here to go forward. So as of right now, we have option 1 and option 2 on the table with the amended sentence to the first line.
I'll ask for a motion to reconsider that the amendment be amended vote.
Okay. Is there a seconder? So there's a seconder. So the motion is to reconsider the amendment, and then now, based on your interest, that amendment actually be voted on by a weighted vote.
Yes.
Okay. Is there? Are we all clear?
Point of order.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't think we are all clear. And not to put too fine a point on it, I believe that a motion to reconsider has to be by someone on the prevailing side. And the mover and the seconder both acknowledged that they weren't on the prevailing side. So I just don't want this to have to come back to the floor at the next meeting because we did it wrong.
I don't think so.
So I am going to ask our recording secretary if I think someone will be refreshing his memory on Robert's rules this evening, and so I'm going to look to Mike Buda.
So we're just waiting for the recording secretary to review our rules on that question.
Mayor Brody.
To get to the same point, could we we don't have to have it as an amendment if you don't want. And it's not worth splitting up this board because of it. What we could do is simply give staff directions to get us that information. And I'm okay with that.
And I would be okay with it too.
So procedurally, I'm not quite sure how that would work, but I do see that provides us a path forward, which I would, at this point of the meeting, would love to have. So
I move reconsideration, having been on the prevailing side.
Okay, so that's been
moved and seconded.
If we vote in favor, that amendment will not be a part of the official motion, but as per the discussion, there will be direction for staff for further reporting back there. Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Clear as mud. We are going to get back to the, as stated on the screen, motions 1 and 2. Is there any further discussion in terms of what's outlined in 1 and 2?
The word.
Mayor Froese?
The word TransLink boards is, I'm confused on that, is still in there. We're just adding that word boards, and that could be, I don't know if you can do unanimous consent, but it's just a clarification.
So that was part of the amendment that we added and have since removed, but I don't think it was the controversial point of the discussion, so it's a TransLink's board, endorsed TransLink board's decision.
That's a clarification.
So I think that's more of a clarification point, so I think we're okay there. Okay, I'm going to call the questions on points 1 and 2. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And I thought that was the easy one. Okay, so we're now moving on to item number 3. There is a proposed recommendation from staff for item number 3. Mayor Brody?
I would like to move a motion relating to number 3, but changing the wording of number 3. And
I think the board needs to have that motion move first, and then.
All right, I'll do it by way of an amendment if that makes you happy.
Yes. So
whatever.
I will move the motion.
Okay, so the motion as proposed by staff is being moved. Is there a seconder? Seconded? Okay, Mayor Brody.
I want to move an amendment to it. Is there any way to get my amendment on the screen? I'll just explain the wording. Okay. Let me summarize it and then I'll get to the exact wording, okay? It talks about consideration at the December 13th meeting, which I think may or may not work. It should be just to a future meeting of the Mayor's Council. And then A is what really needs to change. So my motion would, I'll start at the beginning. Request the additional analysis and a work plan on option 2 in this report for consideration at a future meeting of the Mayor's Council, including, and what we want to get at that meeting, a business plan for the proposed SkyTrain line and funding implications, including contributions from Surrey, similar to the Broadway subway line in Vancouver. B, calculation of the additional costs incurred with changes to the plan. C, revised timing for delivery of the SkyTrain line and potential effects as the result of the delay. D, future transportation options for the SNG line and the corridor. E, what are the changes to the land use and settlement patterns with proposed change and their effects, including the effect on the regional growth strategy. F, consultation plan on the proposed changes. G, answers to the questions posed on pages 31 and 32 of the staff report. And I left it out, but I think we should add in what is in B of the original motion. Initiate a planning process to refresh the south of the Fraser transit plan. So that would be my motion to amend.
Okay, is there a seconder to the amendment, first of all? Second. It has been seconded. I will now, Mayor McCallum.
Oh, sorry. On a point of order, the amendment's more completely against the whole, it's more a motion than a amendment as such, and I would ask your consideration that it changes the whole intent of number 3, which I have moved.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Okay, well, I've got a first point of order from Mayor McCallum, and I do agree that what has been proposed as amendment is a significant departure from that, although there are elements of similarity. But I think based on the point of order that has been made, I'm going to rule that that to get this motion on the table, we really should vote down the original motion on the table if that was to be considered. I would be open to more minor amendments, but since the original recommendation has already been put on the floor, I agree with the point of order that Mayor McCallum has stated is it's too big of a departure from that original motion to be considered an amendment. So with that ruling, I will say that we are back to the original motion. Mayor Brody.
I cannot support the original motion as it is formulated because of what it entails in 3A. By adopting 3A, start immediately with planning, consultation, design, and procurement readiness works for SkyTrain. That flips the switch on the SNG line over to SkyTrain. And I'm not saying that I'm necessarily opposed to it, frankly, but it undermines the whole process we've been through for 4 years if we just say, because this is the popular thing in Surrey, and that's nothing to sneeze at. I mean, that is very important. What is popular in Surrey? But that doesn't mean that necessarily that we can go ahead with the planning, consultation, design, and procurement readiness for SkyTrain. We have to take a look at it. And we have to take a long look at it. And this is not just a delay. If we had all this information, fine, we could vote on it tomorrow. We don't have the information. We have it at a very high level. And Mayor McCallum himself talked about how much he was in favor of the 10-year vision. Well, the 10-year vision calls for 2 LRT lines, or one long one, depending on how you look at it, in Surrey. So what is happening here is without any proposed consequence in terms of funding or otherwise, that we are going to immediately go into planning, consultation, design, and procurement readiness for Skytrain. Maybe that will come. I mean, I'm not opposed to it in principle. I am opposed to it without the kind of due consideration, deliberation, consultation that we have in the current vision and the current plan, and we have to respect that kind of depth of analysis that has come to this point. Okay, Surrey says we want to have another option. I say examine it fully, but don't go into planning and design and all that what that motion contemplates. That's my point.
So I'm just going to ask for a clarification of staff in terms of this recommendation and what the next steps would be if this motion was passed, because my understanding is staff do anticipate that a number of the questions that I think even yourself have raised would enter a bit of a process, but I'm going to let staff.
Yes, if I can clarify, and if the language in number 3A and B is a little bit awkward, we apologize for that. The intent was after further review, which in the motion was assumed at the next meeting on December 13th, meaning we would come back with more, staff would come back with more fulsome information, in part based on today's conversation. We would then come back at the next meeting, or perhaps a meeting after that, depending on the will of the body. And at that point, and only after then, would A and B start. So we are not suggesting, it was not our intent if 3A was adopted today that we would then immediately begin that work. And indeed, if 3A and B are adopted, we would go back and based on whatever feedback today and direction, prepare for a much more detailed work and analysis to support this body's decision-making at the next meeting or any subsequent meeting, again, depending on the will of the body.
Okay, so I think just the clarification there is important, and I think this is a pretty big decision to land on a brand new body with a lot of new members around the table, but there will be more decision points and more work information provided, regardless of what happens with this particular motion, because these are things we are going to need to move forward with. Mayor Froese.
Thank you very much. Just maybe some help with the wording of this motion that we can get to some point of moving forward and getting to lunch. In the motion, it says, request additional analysis and a work plan on option 2. And when you read option 2, it talks about A and B in this report for consideration on December 13th. So I think removing A and B basically says what the intent is. We want additional analysis and work on and a work plan on option 2, which it should end right there. Like, why do we have A and B in there? Because it does lead to confusion that we're going to start immediately with planning. So I think the point that Mayor Brody has mentioned is well taken, and that I would suggest an amendment just to remove A and B because I think it's included in option 2, and I think that's more the intent. So I'll maybe ask the chair.
So an amendment has been moved to essentially keep recommendation just to end after December 13th meeting of the Mayor's Council. I don't think it dramatically changes the actual intent, but I think it would actually help alleviate some of the confusion regarding this particular motion. So is there a seconder to that amendment? Any discussion? Oh, Mayor McCallum.
Yeah, I actually do think it does change. One of the reasons that I have indicated to all of you before is that there has been a lot of work on design of Skytrain. All of your cities, or most of your cities, or 90% of your cities that are sitting around the table already have some type of Skytrain technology. This isn't a new technology to this region. It is technology that the latest line that was finished 1.5 years ago is the Evergreen line. That line in its entirety, we can take the design from that, and I have talked to the designers, and in fact talked to the company that did the report for TransLink. Their comment is we could just use the Evergreen design procurement type of basis and even part of the business plan, and apply it to the Fraser Highway. So there's no sort of long area or time period to do. And so the reason why A is important to Surrey is that we recognize very clearly that we need to start on this process fairly quickly. It doesn't give the go-ahead or anything else from this body to get the information in option 2, and that's why option 2 was put into this thing. But we do want TransLink to start working on immediately, to start working on planning, consulting, design, and procurements for Skytrain. Yes, we do need that to go. As I mentioned earlier, construction costs are going up, inflation's going up now, and we need to at least start the process quickly. And so I am completely against the amendment. I will also, and again, we're caught in this weighted thing, but I would ask the chair to consider that the vote on this be a weighted vote on the amendment. Because I think, Mr. Chair, I think that by taking out A and B, it does affect the main motion, but I'm prepared to allow the amendment to go as long as it's a weighted vote.
Okay, so I am going to ask our executive director to actually read out option 2 from the report, just so that we're clear what it does state regarding option 2, because I think that'll bring more clarity to this discussion.
Okay, so where it says option 2 in the recommendation in quotes, it's referring to the language on page 31 of your report, which reads, proceed immediately with planning, design, and procurement readiness works for the Skytrain and Fraser Highway project, and concurrently initiate a planning process to refresh the Surrey Newton Guildford Rapid Transit consistent with the 10-year vision of building 27 kilometers rapid transit along both corridors. The intent, and this is partly how staff chose to word these recommendations so that the recommendation could be read on its own without having to refer to the longer report. But option 2 in the first part of the recommendation is a shorthand for what is described in option 2 on page 31, which in fact is or is meant to be the same as what is in A and B. So in staff's opinion, whether or not A and B are as part of this motion, it will be that will be the content of the additional analysis and work plan that will be brought back. So regardless of whether those are included, it won't change the work plan for staff for the next meeting.
Okay, well with that, I think we should debate this point even longer. Mayor Dingwall.
And I had to be next. Actually, for me personally, and I suspect others in the room, I think removing A and B does help alleviate some of the concerns while reflecting what Mr. Desmond said in terms of his intent over the next month or 2 months, whatever period of time it takes to bring it back to us. But at the root of all this, I think it's about honoring process. And for us to be able to make informed decisions. And optics do count. Optics with our audience, optics with our citizens, it's about process. And I don't think any of us have sufficient information to say that we have the ability to make informed decisions. That's all we're asking for. This is still to respect Surrey's wishes. But allowing us that time to come back and have more information so that we know what we're talking about and we know the implications for all of us. It doesn't undermine, I don't think, Surrey at all. I guess finally, we're all accountable to our citizens, whether you're in Surrey or you're in Pitt Meadows or you're in Maple Ridge or you're in the North Shore. And so for me, again, it's about finding and receiving greater context, make the informed decisions, being able to explain what we're doing to our citizens, all within a very, very short timeline, which we're all talking about. We're not talking about 6 months. We're talking about, in fact, December 13th is mentioned. And so for me, I think A and B, if it was removed, then plays into process, allows you that month to come back to us. And then at that point, motions will be made and we can consider the wishes of Surrey, but based on a whole lot more information that we currently don't have.
Okay, point of order, Mayor McCallum.
You might like to hear what I'm going to say. After listening to a number of the board members, I feel that as long as staff recognizes the wishes of the citizens of Surrey, that they want to move quickly, and their intent is to have staff start to work, because our staff is already working on Skytrain and so forth, and both staffs have to work very closely together. As long as staff is aware that we want to at least start at some initial things at Skytrain, then I will withdraw my as far as the amendment is concerned, and we'll support the fact that we will stop it at the end of Mayor's Council.
Okay, so I think with that in mind, if there's any more debate, and I do have, I think, both Mayor Stewarts still on the speaking list, but if there's still a desire to debate the amendment, which is to essentially stop before A and B, I am going to call the question, if that's okay. Oh, Mayor Richard Stewart.
Sorry, and I do want to bring it back to a number that I've never made a decision like this before. I've never made a decision without the number, the budget number before us. And so we're in this one, we're eliminating some words, but we're deferring back to the words as they existed in option 2, which also doesn't include the word budgeting. Start immediately with planning and consultation and design, but not budget. And I would love to be able to make this decision with our eyes open rather than differently from the way, when the Evergreen Line was proposed as a rapid transit, we immediately started sitting down with the city and said, that stretch in our downtown, could we have it underground? And they said, not unless you pay for it. If, you know, we're going ahead with what we want, and you could pay $100 million and your last kilometer would be underground, and we didn't come up with $100 million. We made the same pitch to Vancouver, and Vancouver actually did invest dollars. They were told that the region is willing to do this, but if Vancouver wants something other than that, they have to pay, and that's absolutely legitimate. And I do need the budgeting to be in here so that we all understand what kinds of costs we're facing here, because we had those costs before us when we put LRT in and we put rapid buses in and all of those other things, and I would hate to depart from good practice in the interests of expediency. I absolutely support the Surrey's right to determine, but I also absolutely support the region's need to have some numbers because we're the ones paying for it.
So I think a common theme that we have heard around the table is, as we go down this path, and we will be making more substantial decisions in future meetings, is more information is required, for the entire Mayor's Council. And I think we can take that comment as direction to make sure those elements, which I would anticipate would be reviewed and would be coming back, are definitely presented. So with that, I am going to call the question on the amendment. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Now we're back to the original motion, which is item number 3, minus A and B. Is there any further discussion? Director Harris.
Thanks very much, and I can support it as is. I just would ask that as staff, in part of your additional analysis and work plan, I want to go from Mayor Stewart's comments as they do the analysis and work plan in addition to the questions they've got listed, which are obviously ones that they would be looking at. I would ask that they add the questions that were on the initial motion, or on the motion and the amendment that was put forward by Mayor Brody. That's referred to 31, 32, but there were additional questions to those that you have that staff have listed on pages 31 and 32. And they're in relation to business plan and costs and funding implications. So I would just ask that those be included in the direction to staff or request of staff, please.
Yeah, I would think the questions that were outlined, and I believe on page 32 of the report, the reason they're in the report is those are questions that staff would be moving forward. I think we can provide that.
They're not exhaustive, so we've taken all the additional notes. That was the purpose.
Yes, the purpose was the additional questions. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, with that, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Is there any discussion?
Well,
Sorry,
I
Mayor
guess
Booth,
I'm getting used to the technology. I have been pressing my buttons.
So the button actually doesn't do anything. You actually have to put your hand
And
up.
I
So.
did this time, so.
Okay, fine.
I
Mayor
have
Booth, I
learned
apologize.
that during this meeting. Thank you very much. I just want to clarify that even by moving this forward to the next meeting for analysis, this council has made a decision. And that decision, and again, I respect Mayor McCallum's representations around his community, fair enough. But we, as a council, are making a decision to move forward without, I understand we're getting information, but we are making a decision without analysis. And the decision that has been made today around that, there are a lot of implications for our region, the constituents that we represent. I just want to clarify that point.
Yeah, and I think definitely the decision we are today is pointing us in a direction to look forward, but there are going to be future decision points around this table, and I do need to make very, very clear to the entire body, we are not making a lot of final decisions, and this particular matter will probably be a pretty common agenda item for the next number of areas, and there will be, as more information is presented, more refined decisions, but there is no doubt the direction based on the decisions we appear to be going forward with the Mayor's Council is going to be directing staff to spend more time on this particular component. So there's no doubt that is a direction that is coming out of today, but it is not a final decision on that, and there will be future discussions regarding that.
Thank you.
Mayor Brody?
Could I just ask a question of staff? Let me put it as to my understanding. I understand that this analysis and whatever we're doing in Surrey with light rail or Skytrain, that's not affecting any of the other phase 2 projects. Am I correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and with that, I am going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, so we have gotten through the substantial part of the agenda. We do have 4 open delegates still to be heard from. So I do want to give an opportunity for those folks, if they are still around, to come forward. The first is Peter Ladner. Yeah, I'm not gonna, at this point,
Right-hand button. It's okay. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I know I'm standing between you or sitting between you and lunch, so I'll be as brief as I can be. I'm here as the chair of the Better Transit and Transportation Coalition, and I'd like to welcome all the new mayors and old mayors coming back, returning mayors to the Transit Mayors Council, and say how eager we are to work with you in advancing transportation improvements in our region. We are a coalition of 140 organizations that came together around the referendum, the ill-fated plebiscite rather, to get support for transit improvements in the region. And we have a representation from labor, business, environmental organizations, health organizations, and we are watching closely and very concerned about the future of transit and transportation in the region. And I don't want to go through some of what you've already heard and said. I was very reassured to hear that whatever decision you made today will not affect the rest of phase 2, because that was one of our big concerns, and we don't want to start unraveling this whole carefully woven fabric that's been put together over the last number of years. But I just wanted to say one thing that we would be on the lookout for was to ensure that whatever you're doing is based on principles. And that means, for example, tying in with land use zoning, tying in with the regional growth strategy, solid business cases for whatever investments you're making, and assessment of the impacts on congestion, GHGs, public health, social equity, and economic development. And I'll just simply say that we have scars, and many of you around this table have scars from that plebiscite, where, as you may recall, the public was going, what are you doing with our money? How can we support, in that case it was a minor tax increase, to pay for whatever it is they saw that was an excess or an unjustified spending? And I would just caution that whatever decisions you make going forward on this change, and we're not saying what we think Surrey should do, but if it's done in a way that the public perceives this to be some kind of impulsive, sudden, unjustifiable decision or plan going forward, that you would be in danger of a great erosion of public support for all your other good work. And we're here to help you and get involved with the regional transportation strategy going forward, but it's going to be very hard for us if we are being asked to get behind some plans that appear to be just suddenly arrived at with very, or at least inadequate consideration of the multiple billions of dollars that are at play. So we look forward to working with you and ensuring that whatever we've already got confirmed will go ahead, and the future will be a bright one for transit. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Our next speaker is Mike Soren. He's not here. Alex Boston.
Good afternoon. I'm going to circulate my analog presentation and you can follow along. I'll do it. Thank you all, firstly, for choosing to serve the public, and congratulations on resuming power or acquiring power. My uncle who raised me said, with great power comes great responsibility. And that's actually what I wanted to talk about. And the three responsibilities, really resuming on Mr. Ladner's comments, are about congestion, carbon, and cost. And what I'm deeply concerned with is not any of the current proposals or the historic proposal in the mayor's vision, but the inadequacy of the land use planning to go along with these big infrastructure decisions. The single biggest determinant of successful rapid transit investment, mass transit investment, is mass. And that's a critical mass of people. Looking at, close to 60 rapid transit projects across the U.S., light and heavy rail, most of them are not cost effective. The single reason, they don't have the jobs, they don't have the residents in those corridors. We spend a lot of time talking about costs. We have to think about revenue, and revenue comes from ridership. And the only way we get ridership is by having growth in those corridors. If you look across this region today, one of the fastest growing regions in Canada, half of our urban fabric is actually hollowing out. That's our single-family neighborhoods. Never in history have our single-family neighborhoods been so lightly populated, and that's because of plummeting household densities. For those of you who can't appreciate this PowerPoint presentation in analog form, you can go to renewablecities.ca, just search for Skytrain, it'll come up right away, and it'll all be available to you. But what we have are high-density nodes, hollowed-out hoods, and then we have widely distributed development along beyond those single-family areas. And this means high congestion and high carbon. It is really quite surprising that with an $8.5 billion public transit investment, we are not going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The single biggest source is personal transportation, not just in Greater Vancouver, but in British Columbia and Canada. And this is a challenge that all of us have to contend with, and it's a really tricky one because they're growing around the world. But we won't reduce congestion with the existing expenditure. We won't reduce the amount of driving. It's actually going to be the number of vehicle kilometers traveled is going to go up with $8.5 billion. There's a risk it could go up even more with some of the new proposals on the agenda. What we have to do, and TransLink does excellent multi-criteria analysis, we need to begin to start to integrate things like land use planning in a really critical way. Specific job and resident density thresholds, as are expected in other regions. We do have one of the best transportation authorities in North America. The recent transit supportive guidelines that were developed, adopted this summer are outstanding, but you'll see in the presentation that I have shared with you, they are omitting any kind of density thresholds for any kind of mass transit infrastructure investment. They exist in Ontario. They exist with Metrolinx. We need them there. It's important for taxpayers. It's important for transit riders. It's important for freight. It's important for people that drive. We're not getting bang for our buck because we're investing. We have gold-plated infrastructure plans, and in some areas we have bronze-plated land use plans. And we don't need towering densities. We can actually have moderate densities. You look at a place like Barcelona, most of the population lives in 8 stories or under. There's very few towers. We don't need towers, but we do need critical mass. It's not true that if you build it, they will come. We have transit stations, Skytrain stations, $50 million a pop in this region, that are 15 to 30-year-old, and they still don't meet standard accepted density thresholds. I've outlined just 3 there, but they're in every single municipality that currently has Skytrain. We can do much, much better with our existing resources. Those are zero-cost public transit investments that we can make right now. We can cut congestion, we can cut greenhouse gas emissions, and we can get further to the top. We actually do have one of the best land use regimes in the region, but it's not sufficient to be good any longer. We have to be great.
So we have gotten to the end of the 5 minutes. I'll let you make a concluding remark if you'd like.
Thank you for prompting me. I have 3 recommendations. We have to examine land use options, and that's a diversity of options with every type of mass transit investment that we make. And we have to optimize our infrastructure investments and land use plans and phasing on key criteria. And that's cost, not just expenditures, it's net cost, it's revenue, it's congestion, it's carbon, and we should be including an intensification of underutilized mass transit plans in any further planning in the region. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. And our final speaker is Christina Ilnici. Is Christina here?
Yeah, here she comes.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to the new Mayor's Council. My